afternoon. I would like to call this meeting to order. Today is Groundhog Day. Welcome. And let's get to business here. Madam Secretary?
Mr. Frank.
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here.
Mr. Castro.
Here.
I'm here. You're here.
And I'm here, and so we're all here. We have a quorum. I'd like to welcome Andre Gonzalez, our student advisor, and I'd like to remind you that I'm going to try and be speedy at this meeting, so just in case you haven't voted, you still have until 7 o'clock to vote for our bond. I actually walked to my polling place. There were only 30 votes cast at the Las Alturas Fire Station, but there we go. Okay, I think I will go ahead and I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, we have a first and a second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so then we move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our first item of business is discussion of suspending NM Teach growth plans. I've asked Dr. Marufo to give a briefing to the board regarding that, so if I may, I'd like to turn that over to her at this time.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Rounds. This afternoon, HR would like to present an update based on the request you've asked regarding the NM Teach growth plans. We did look at comparison of two other school districts, and this afternoon I'd like to introduce Tracy O'Hare, who will provide you with the summary of the comparisons of three school districts' growth plans.
And Madam President, before we go there, this is in response to our last board meeting. I'd like the board to know that we did converse with Albuquerque Public Schools and Santa Fe Public Schools, but because of the session and the distance, they did not send representatives down, and I just want to
we
alert you to
understand.
that. But we have captured here their particulars, so we'll be happy to follow up if there are any further follow-ups you have as a board.
Thank you.
Tracy?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam President, members of the board, members of the audience. As Dr. Marufo has stated, this chart was developed to help compare the three districts on the implementation of helping teachers grow, or when teachers are not seen as performing their job duties, then the principals are observing them, and they are determining whether or not that we need to support them in some way. I'd like to note that each of the district's plans, that the bargaining unit is in support of each district's plan for action for those types of teachers. It's just also important to note that all of the districts use observations and not student achievement for their to instigate one of those growth plans. So for Las Cruces Public Schools, you can see that our evaluation intervention is instigated through principals' observation, determining that there needs to be growth, and at that point we have 5 observations following that. In Albuquerque, the same thing. There are determined through observations, and if that observation deems necessary for teacher intervention, then they have what is called a PAR, a peer assistance review, and they use some of their teachers, a committee of teachers, administrator, to make recommendations to the teacher, and then the principal makes a report. And in Santa Fe, they also use what we do is also growth plan, determined through observations, and if they determine after an observation 1, they go to observation 2. If that's not corrected, then they go to observation 3, and after that, then they determine their rehire determination at that point.
And Madam President, one of the things I would like to note is that for my chair, when I look at this, number one, in our current practice at the last board meeting, a question that arose was, does the state's New Mexico Teach PGP protocol cause us to automatically do professional growth plans on the employee? And that was a question, I believe, that is specific to Albuquerque Public Schools and Santa Fe Public Schools. In our review of our situation, as well as the other two, in none of the cases is that the reason you go to the professional growth plan. Our practice is to use what is within our negotiated agreement, as it is with APS and with Santa Fe Public Schools. A key difference between the three of them, when we did this comparison, I believe ours is the most teacher-friendly, is the term I'd like to use, of the three. It has more opportunities, 5 observation opportunities for corrective action or action changes to occur, where in Albuquerque and in Santa Fe you have fewer. A difference that the board, and we may want to contemplate with our NEA Las Cruces group, is in negotiations, the difference between Las Cruces and Albuquerque Public Schools is they use the process of a peer assistance and review process. And quite candidly, I find that palatable, but in our discussions, we haven't gone to that level. We've talked sometimes around that. And so certainly that would be a future discussion that we might want to have in negotiations. But what isn't in any of the three cases is that the PGP process under New Mexico Teach does not activate any of the three, including ours. And so I think that's, I hope that clarifies the question.
Well, I think it's been very worthwhile to have the comparison, first of all, because it is the 3 largest school districts. I think it's very good to see that there is some semblance of similarity. 5 observations. Is there time in a year for 5 observations? It must be rough for those that are having 5 to get those done, for a principal to have to do those. I do like the consulting teacher aspect of APS system. I think that's something that is helpful to a teacher that is under that much scrutiny. The question that I have is, what kicks off not the PDP, every teacher does a PDP. We all did it every year, and we try to be that's part of being a teacher, to make a plan for that year. But what kicks off the performance growth plan? Is it the VAM scores, or is it being rated minimally effective or ineffective?
So
Madam
go
President,
ahead.
oh,
Please.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
It is within that second row there, it's titled, when is the evaluation intervention initiated? And for our district in particular, it has nothing to do with, it absolutely has nothing to do with really even the teacher report. It has to do with our bargaining agreement, and it states, upon an evaluator's concern about a person's job performance at any given time, then that person can be placed on a PGP.
Okay,
So,
so, go
Madam
ahead.
President, I'm sorry, in none of the 3 cases, either any of the 3 districts, do we use VAM as a determinant. It is the principal's review of the employee. And if I may, if it'd be in order, I'd like to go back to the 5 observation question.
Yes.
You'll notice that, and this is part of our bargaining agreement, there was concern that we made sure that we were trying to do corrective action with the employee. And so you'll notice that after observation 2, well, observation 1 is a verbal counseling. Observation 2 is a written verbal if not corrected. And then the PGP is developed. Then the thinking in our negotiations, as I understand it, is then following the PGP, there should be continued observation. So you see observation 3 and observation 4, if not corrected, after observation 3. And so not in every case would it be 5, only in cases where it's going to a recommendation of non-renewal. So the intent, as I understood it, was that we were trying to be sure we had sufficient interaction with the teachers so we're all clear why we might get to a recommendation for non-renewal. Now, may I also state for the record, Madam President, in the 9 years I've superintended this district, and I'm coming up to the 9th anniversary in about a week, not one teacher in this district has been terminated because of this. All terminations have been other matters and not around this particular aspect. That would lead me to believe that as we move through these processes together, which is always with the view of the district, we've been able to make corrective action, corrective work with teachers so they're able to meet the expectations that we have as an employer. So I'd surely want to remind us that there has not been an action taken by me in 9 years going to the end of this. And so I think that from my chair is a positive, that it shows an effort on the behalf of the district to assist teachers in their practice.
Well, it's just, my purpose in having even this, having gone through this exercise is to reassure teachers that there will be no consequential actions if they are rated low on their VAM scores, and just to ease up on their stress.
Madam President, and I certainly respect that, and I agree with that. That's why I want to be very clear about VAM is not a part of this process.
Okay. All right.
I just want to make, if I may, one
Yes.
clarification as well, and that is, I think some of the concern came because it was, prior to the injunction, it was an automatic that people were put on a growth plan. That automatic trigger has gone away and was taken away immediately.
By the injunction.
Well, it was taken away through the district when we said
Okay.
we would not go that route. We would go only if you observed and felt there was an issue, and not rely on those effectiveness ratings.
Board members, do you have any questions on this chart here? Okay, any comments?
My only comment would be, Madam Chairman, is that we might want to have a peer teacher or a consulting teacher. That might be something that would be worth looking into.
Okay, that, I think that's a good idea. I think that's a positive
Madam
next step.
President, let me go there because I'm looking at my folks right here.
Oh, okay.
That is a negotiated
Okay.
issue,
Wow.
and
Jeff, we're willing to look at that, absolutely, but that's a subject for negotiation.
And may I also, Madam Chair, just validate, I believe we've had this discussion a couple of times that we've looked at best-case scenarios and how we provide
We
support.
have, and just to clarify, at the beginning of the year, people were directed to be placed on,
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Davis is asking that people go to the microphone so that he can hear.
Sorry.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Rounds. Yeah, just to clarify, at the beginning of the year, because of VAS scores, the district, as I understand it, was told to place a certain amount of teachers because of the VAS scores on growth plans. We approached the district and we worked with HR, and we clarified that that was indeed, we quibbled about it, and we had a good outcome. And so I understand that no one was placed because of VAS scores. However,
Okay.
I think it did bring it to the attention of certain principals, so it was basically a school-to-school issue. So we're in a fairly good place now.
Okay, and
Thank
that's good to know.
Thank you.
All right, well, we appreciate the presentation, we appreciate the explanation, and I think that we just have to keep the stress level down for our teachers, okay? That's my purpose. And Mr. Hartman, did you have something you wanted to comment? Thank you, Ms. O'Hare, for your presentation.
Madam President and members of the board, I spoke with Ellen Bernstein. I'm Bruce Hartman. I spoke with Ellen Bernstein a few weeks ago. She's the president of AFT in Albuquerque. They had I don't know, approximately 1,200 teachers, I believe, that were minimally effective or ineffective. And they, in fact, did place some of those teachers on growth plans. But after the injunction, they did suspend growth plans that were based upon the teacher evaluation. I mean, it is true that we did work something out here with HR where they get an observation, and depending on that observation, maybe a second observation, because I did work with several teachers, and the one had her first observation, there were some things that she needed to work on, but then the second one was good. She didn't go on a growth plan. But the other two, their second observation was not quite where they wanted it to be, so they were on a growth plan. And I don't feel either one of those teachers would be on a growth plan if it wasn't for their rating on the teacher evaluation. So, I mean, and even though we based it on observation, that first observation was triggered by their rating on the teacher evaluation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman.
Madam
Um,
President.
Yes.
Now,
go ahead.
I just think, we need to summarize this discussion and get it out to our staff so that they know the status of this situation through our communication vehicles.
So, Madam President, could I ask Mr. Frank, Madam President, if you would like to work with Joe, we'd be more than happy to prepare a joint statement with the board out to employees to clarify if that would help. And I think
that
if
would
you wouldn't
be-
mind, we certainly appreciate the point, and to sort of decelerate concern.
Correct.
I think that might be a good thing to do, but I'd rather she wordsmith it than me, Madam President. If you wouldn't mind, if Mr. Frank could be the rep to do that, I'd be more than happy to do
I'm happy with that, Mr.
that.
Frank, if you're willing to do it.
Madam
Certainly.
President, you could do it. I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
And I think that this is part of doing things Las Cruces way. I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
this is what we're getting to. We're doing things our way. I mean, we're just trying to keep in perspective the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Rounds, I just wanted to state that the district did have every intention of placing the people with the VAM scores that were minimally effective or ineffective on growth plans. And they sent out emails to that effect initially, okay? Then we had a teacher at Oñate who was not shy from going on the record, who was a runner-up for our Las Cruces Public School Teacher of the Year a couple years ago, who is an excellent teacher. Her colleagues, all three, or the principals at Oñate, which is the school she teaches, all agreed that this was not. It couldn't be valid because it wasn't describing the person before them. So when we got enough stories like that, we made an appointment with HR, and we had a 3-hour meeting. And it was because of the strength of the language in our collective bargaining agreement and the fact that they knew that this board intends to uphold that bargained agreement, that we were able to convince them that it would probably be a good idea to follow the bargained agreement, because we've worked on that language for probably 20 years. We have worked with HR for 20 years to find language that would help us to help struggling teachers, and if in fact we needed to help them find another job, the language that is in the agreement would help us to do that. So the district did have every intention of placing teachers on growth plans, and did until we, said that we really felt it was a violation of our agreement. But it wasn't going to be the first time. Thank you.
And that's why the injunction, because there is injustice, or there wasn't clarity in the way they were doing it, the state was doing it. I think that's why this has all happened.
Well, and there were many, many
Yes.
errors that were not addressed. There were questions that couldn't be answered. And you can't ask a person to improve their craft if you can't tell them where they fell down. I mean, what kind of growth plan are you going to write? Well, you got a number on a paper that was spit out up in Santa Fe rating you this rating when even though nobody may agree with that rating. And that happened more times than you might believe.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sanchez, and thank you to the district for bringing up the conversation, doing the comparison, and allowing us to discuss it. I think we're on the right track right now, okay?
Thank you, Madam President.
We can move on now to cash balance.
Madam President, thank you. Now, one of the things that we intend on doing, Madam President, we've talked with you at several of our work sessions, is to begin a discussion to develop our budget summit. We have suggested and have moved out on breaking the summit discussion into several parts. As we get closer to budget, we may want to go back and do some review and renewal of that discussion. Budget's pretty lengthy. I just got back from Santa Fe last night. It isn't pretty, and we're working really diligently at trying to understand what our revenue load might be. Before I go to the cash balance, let me just say this. The total new revenue is $30 million all in for the state of New Mexico for recurring costs. My hope, and I worked well into the late afternoon and early evening yesterday with some folks, is we're working very hard to try to secure around 20 of the $30 million for public schools. Normally we get half and half, and we've been very impressive at doing that. So we have no idea where that may go. There are no announcements coming out of Santa Fe at this time. House Appropriations and Finance is scheduled to adopt their recommendation by around Thursday or Friday and move it to the Senate. But we do have several pieces of information that are salient to talk about. The first is cash balance. Now, later on, you're going to act on a sale of bonds. And I've informed the board that cash balance is a key lever in our interest rates on bonds. And we have Mr. Cassidy here. Mr. Dean and I went to Moody's in Dallas several weeks ago to try to keep our rating level, which indeed we were able to accomplish. Cash balance is important also because it's money that we commit into budget every year at 100% of the cash balance. We put it in parcels and don't expect to always expend to zero. And today, what I've asked Mr. Dean to do is to begin our discussion on cash balance. And if I may, Madam President, members of the board, I'd like to turn to Mr. Dean for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Rounds. Madam President, members of the board, some of the items that we want to talk about and address and really kind of start the process. I know it's been a year since we've been through many of these topics, but is to start the discussion and the re-education and remembering as we build budget. Bill, would you go to the first slide? Now, as we look at the history of our cash balance, and one of the things that the rating agency really looks at when they look at bonds is they look at our cash balance or the savings account, the amount for emergencies. One of the things that Moody's says, and I believe that their numbers may be a little, it's going to take us a while to get to the amount of reserve that they wish for us to have. But if we look at 6% of our revenue, then we are looking at a emergency reserve fund in the $11 to $12 million at 6% of our recurring revenue. As we look at the cash balance that we had over the past several years, and I think we have, 12 years on this particular slide, you can see that we were in a declining position in our cash balance 2004 through 2007. Mr. Rounds came to the district in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? And we were able to turn that and increase the cash balance. Now, with the downturn in the economy and everything else, we started kind of relying on our cash balance to help us with the educational program, because that is our mission, is for the education of kids. We ended last fiscal year at $4 million. That was 2.2% of the recurring revenue in the operational fund. At the end of this year, our initial projection on cash balance is $5 million. And I know that I've said this previously, $5 million sounds like a lot of money if it's in your personal bank account. And it is, but it is not a lot of money when you look at it from a district perspective. Because the very 1st of July, we do have a lot of very large bills that are due. Also from this $5 million is where the district has to front the expenditures for the federal programs and request reimbursement. So the $5 million is our initial projection for cash balance. I think it should be pretty close, but we will fine tune that as we continue through the budget development.
Madam President, if I could, go back just this slide for a second, please. So, Madam President, you'll see that in FY10, we cross that line that is it's called targeted cash balance. There is a lot of thought in the financial world for public schools that particular line is a very reasoned place for a district of our size to land in cash balance. And you'll see as we got in FY15, 14 and 15, we drew down below the line very substantially. To do that, I just want to make this point, to hold that cash balance where it was, you may recall that when the state had the major downturn, we went through some attrition of staff. You'll also recall that as you get through time, I began to add those back. In fact, we replaced, I think it was about 218 positions that we had drawn down out of our 3,400 Liz, positions that we have. We didn't have to terminate anyone or RIF, but we had to live through the financial crisis of time. So the balance always is staffing levels and how much we pay them, and then this line of expediency about where you need to end at the end of the year. And there's no debate about those numbers, because these are the audited cash balances of the district in the operating reserve. So these are real facts. As you go through the year, it gets distorted because we receive money in parcels from the state, and we have expenses that are after those parcels come in, like payroll. As an example, we have a summer payroll that's very, so Terry, one payroll cycle is approximately how much? I knew I'd put you on the spot and you wouldn't remember.
Where's Crystal?
I think it's in there, I think it's in the
7
range,
million?
Chris, to $7 million.
7 million, Crystal?
So let me go to the cash balance point. It's about 7.3 million, I think, if that's the number I looked at last. So at 7.3 million, that means that we have less than one payroll cycle in reserve. And that's what Moody's gets very concerned about, because our largest cost is payroll. In fact, what Moody's would like us to see is to have at least 2 full payroll cycles, or in other words, 1 full month of operating reserve in the bank. And so when we were at that high point in FY13, we met that standard. But since that time, we've had, for lots of reasons, to draw this down and be where we are. The Moody's question is, are we stable enough? Do we have enough financial planning to bring ourselves back to what they consider to be the standard of 1 month's operating reserve? So that's about $16.8 million in today's numbers. And that's where they'd like to see us land. There's not a ghost of a chance, Madam President, members of the board, that we can do that in 1 year or even 2 years to get there. And that's what we told them. But as we develop our budget through time, one of the discussions we're going to have is how do we begin to recoup our cash reserve? And so we wanted you to know we're projecting end of year at about $5 million. Mr. Dean, you'll be sharing some information I brought back from Santa Fe and we got from Paul Aguilar, I think, in the next slide. Is that correct? So let me turn it back to you.
In this particular slide, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to compare our budgeted revenue from the current year to next year, based upon a projection. Our current year revenue numbers look like they're going to hold. Things look like it's going to make in total. However, one of the items that you will see that there is a note on is the $180 million under the current fiscal year under the state equalization guarantee. We received a letter from the Public Education Department as of yesterday that we are going to be getting a $10 per unit increase for the current fiscal year. That $10 per program unit calculates to $448,804.40. So anyway, we will be bringing a bar back to the board to shore up a couple of places in the budget that we think that we're going to have problems. But that is an increase that we are getting mid-year.
So, Madam President, get there.
Question,
could
is
you have
it
a
for this year?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
This year.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and I want everybody to understand, I fully disclose. So we received, I was in Santa Fe, in fact, when it happened, I was with Paul Aguilar, as we looked at the number he came up with. So this is a good issue for us this year because it increases our revenue source. The first thing that I immediately went to was, oh my goodness, that's almost equal to one furlough day. So the tendency would be, well, let's go spin and do that now. The problem is what Terry's going to talk about in the state equalization guarantee. Okay, and Terry, go ahead with that. You'll notice that in the current year, the state equalization guarantee is a little over $180 million. That's the amount of money the state writes us the checks on during the year. Because our training and experience index has fallen, if we have the $10 increase that Terry just talked about, that generates us $448,000, and yet another $10 increase in unit value on top of that out of this legislative action happening right now for next year. So that's a $20 delta in unit value, an increase for next year over this year's starting point. We still come in with our state equalization guarantee at about $500,000 less for next year than we have in this year. And so one of the discussions as we go to the BAR, probably your next meeting, that we will likely have with your finance committee, and we may want to have here, and certainly invite Patrick and others into the discussion. My recommendation to you is to put it in places in the budget like transportation, which is upside down, so we don't have to augment it with dollars that we can carry forward for next year, and a few other places like that. And step away from what could be, even my initial reaction was, well, let's give everybody one of the furlough day amounts back to them. Because the prudence is you look ahead at the likely income for next year continues to dig a hole in how much money it will take to continue the operation. So we want to come back and talk about it. It just happened yesterday. We don't have our plan vetted out. Terry and I spent some time earlier today talking about options we might have to bring to you in budget. But what's important is that state equalization guarantee, that is the largest check, if you will, set of checks that come into the district. That's what runs us. And that's why I've been in Santa Fe as much as I have, because that number is what's being debated in Santa Fe right now today. And will remain, it'll be remain to be seen what happens. So this has a $10 increase plus another $10 increase for next year. When I talked to Paul Aguilar, just to be very honest with all of you, he was concerned about the $10 increase because from his chair there was a likelihood that next year's unit value would be less than the unit value of this increase because of the way units work in the state of New Mexico. So he was kind of concerned about that. The good news is they sent us the money. Because if he didn't, under state rules, any dollars that he has in that fund for us that aren't spent by June 30th, the state sweeps from his account and puts back in the general fund and takes it away from public schools. And that isn't good business, because that's an appropriation we're entitled to. So I just wanted you to understand that. Mr. Dean, let me go back to you.
Board members, do you have any questions right now before he proceeds?
Yes,
Go
Madam
ahead.
President. Mr. Rounds, could you explain to the audience what T&E is?
I'm so sorry,
And,
yes,
and
sir.
also, do we have any idea as to, at this time, why it's decreased by $960,000?
We do.
Good.
Thank you. So T&E is an index in the formula. Every teacher in the district is looked at by two factors. One is, how many years of experience do you have? And the second is, what is your degree status? Do you have a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience? You have a factor attached to you. You're worth 0.75 index points. In other words, 25% less than just one, 25% less than just one. If you are a master's plus 45 hours or a doctorate degree, and you have more than 15 years, 16 years of experience or more, you're on the other end of the matrix, and guess what you're worth? 1.50 units. Now, every teacher in the district is plotted every year based on the October payroll. So we put them in the October payroll, and you average it. FTE teachers divided into the T&E, and that gives you this index. The bad news and good news is that index multiplies times all the other units in the district. So here's what happened, Mr. Frank, Madam President. We're getting older, kind of like me. And as we do that, people are retiring. Replacement teachers are coming with less training and less experience than departing teachers on the average. When that happens, that index falls. The good news is, it used to be in the same year you were doing business in, and they adjusted your money in the current year. That no longer is the case. This October's payroll dictates what next year's training and experience units will be. So the $980,651 is an absolute reduction at current unit value as we project it into next year. That's the drop in T&E. It went down 0.006. Our index went down, listen, it went down 0.006. In other words, it went down 0.6%. That's not much, is it? 0.6% cost us $980,000, almost $1 million. So going from this year to next year, that's a guarantee we'll have less revenue to that amount at best. If unit value went down, then accordingly that would also fall some more. So that's the balancing act that we know today is an absolute fact. And so then this chart that Terry's provided calculates that into what happens to all the other things that are happening, including we increase the cash by about $1 million, but we lose T&E by about $1 million. Yikes. Back to you, Madam President, I'm sorry, are there other questions?
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Mr. Castro?
Madam President, I just have you probably answered this before, but there's been apparently a dramatic drop in that cash balance. It went $4 million from 2013 to 2014, and it's been dramatic during that time. And you said there were several reasons. Can you go over some of those reasons again, the main reasons that happened?
Madam President, Mr. Castro, absolutely. A couple of reasons. One is we increased staff. So when you bring more staff members on, it costs you more money. Secondly, T&E has continued to fall. It went up in 1 year, but it's had a decline in place. Utilities costs have gone up. Other costs to do business have gone up. And so what we've done is, rather than living off of our recurring revenue, we've gone to our savings account, to the cash balance, and used it on things that recur every year.
Yeah.
The problem is when you spend your savings money, you only have $1 and it's not there the next year. So that's part of the dynamic that happens. A rule of thumb when you build a budget is, for every dollar you take in non-recurring revenue, the right budgeting strategy is, in the next year, you add back $2 of recurring revenue to make up for the $1 drop, because you have to make up what you spent plus one more just to get even. And we haven't been able to do that over time because of the priorities we have, including trying to meet class size requirements keep our staffings at levels that we support. Now, we did staffing adjustments in the current year budget to try to catch up with some of that. But, Madam President, that's why we talk so often about our number of employees, our class loads, and all of that. And in a moment, we're going to get into the staffing side, because that really is a very large part of what causes the budget to move. I also forgot insurance. I'm sorry, insurance went up too.
Okay.
Just a follow-up question. What would you do different now to avoid that kind of thing?
Mr. Castro, I'll apologize to everybody for making a couple of assumptions, okay? And I missed one. I assumed that oil and gas would rise from where it was at. So the state would put in more money in subsequent years. Let me give you an example of my problem, because there's some really smart people, a lot smarter than I am, that are doing that right now in New Mexico. Do you know that on December the 12th, these folks that work at the state level and all the economists do that work supposed in their forecasts that oil and gas would have $238 million new dollars for just this cycle. And in January, last week, they had to make that different, and it is now $30 million. Now, Mr. Castro, I've been around public school finance for a long time, but I don't have all the finesse even of those folks. And if in a month they missed it by $208 million, me missing it on my guess for what might happen in public schools, while I'll apologize for it, I think is reasoned, because everybody was missing it. And I rely on those forecasts. I have a lot of discussion with the people doing that work. And so I missed that, and I apologize. I would have made decisions differently, or recommended to you to make decisions differently as a board had I had that crystal ball that we all wish we had. Unfortunately, we didn't. The bad news, it would have meant I would have hired back less staff. I would not have been as aggressive on maintaining the view this board has had, and appropriately so, that when insurance increases go up, we treasure employee take-home. And so if your take-home is going to go down because those rates go up, what you've acted on as a board, Madam President, Mr. Castro, and previous boards, was to be sure that the take-home pay stayed the same. And we appropriated new funds to take care of that. I would have come to you and suggested not to do those things instead. I didn't do that. I apologize again about that, but as you weigh the options, and they're so hard, Madam President, Mr. Castro, as a board, as you're doing now, we have to figure that out and do our very best at that.
Mr. Davis, did you have a question? Thank you, Mr. Castro.
Yeah, I just suggested that,
Yes.
sorry guys, but could we get a white paper on this so that we could think about what they're doing and how could we approach it so that we have a better handle on what happens?
Madam President, we'll be more than happy to provide you any oversight you would like. Mr. Davis, if I could, perhaps through the Finance Committee or elsewhere, Mr. Dean, I know, would like to work and dial in what information you're wanting us to zero in on. I'm more than happy to do that as we move through time.
All right,
I have a question, Madam
Ms. Andre.
Going back to the previous slide, just so I can kind of understand it a little bit better. So from 13 to 14, staffing for the district increased?
What I'll do is pull those numbers in. Here's the bubble that I was talking about, and there are particulars I'm sure that will be debated by others. In the big scheme of things, we have had, as you went to FY 8, 9, 10, 11, the state downturn in general fund was huge. And they brought in federal money that supplemented what was happening in the state. When that happened, over a period of a couple of years, I believe the number, and I don't have it in front of me, that sticks in my head, is about 213, I think is the number of positions we took offline in our budget. And then over the years since then, we've added those back. As we've done our analytics on it, we've tried to look at class size as an example, a very important feature. When that first happened, we petitioned the state to allow class sizes to exceed state statute numbers by an average of 2 students per class. That meant there were less teachers necessary on the overall staffing. We have now gone through and adjusted this with the board's assistance, both, so that we've brought class sizes back into the state average size. And that was an increased proportionality to staffing. So when I say staffing increase, that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you.
All right, if there is no more questions, then I think we're ready to move on to staffing.
Thank you, Madam President. If I may, Madam President, because we now have a new software that we've shared with the board about staffing, and I've asked Dr. Marufo, if you don't mind, to spin through the staffing portion with you.
Okay, I'm going to try to multitask here and try to drive the pointer and speak at the same time, so bear with me. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Rounds, and audience members. Last month, I came before you to present student enrollment information. I brought the board up to speed with what our 40 and 80-day enrollment counts look like. This afternoon, I'd like to present you with the current staffing in our schools. Again, this is current staffing based on the 80-day count. The staffing summary represents staff assigned to each school on the 80th day, which was December 1st of the school year. I'm going to review 3 slides with information. The first will be, we'll take a look at the elementary staffing information, and then we'll move on to middle and high school. So here is a chart that represents all of our elementary schools and their enrollment that occurred on the 80th day. That's the first column. Those numbers are the numbers that I brought to you last month. In looking at the general staffing across the board in each school, I look at several categories. In the first column, you'll see how many principals are assigned to that school, how many assistant principals. The third column over looks at extended contracts. Do we have extended contracts provided to any staff in those schools? Then I look at general ed teachers, which includes classroom teachers, PE, art, and music teachers. I look at the number of SPED teachers, the number of bilingual teachers. So for elementary, you see 3 green columns, and the total, the sum of those 3 green columns equals the pink column. So that tells me how many staff do I have in that particular school. If I look at Alameda Elementary, there are a total of 29 teachers in that school. If I divide 29 into the 473, I get a pupil-teacher ratio of 16.3 students per teacher. And I want to clarify, PTR does not equate to class size for this specific information. And you can see, the rest of the schools follow the same suit. I also look at what's the pupil administrator ratio. At Alameda Elementary, it's 236.5 students per administrator. As we're looking at equity across the board, this is probably an area we want to take a look at. When I did a summary of the schools, the average PTR, which is in the very last row, the average PTR for the district is 15.8 students per teacher. The lowest PTR was at White Sands Elementary, where you have 12 students per teacher, followed by Mesilla, who had 12.4 students per teacher. The highest PTR at the elementary level is at Fair Acres Elementary. They have 18 students per teacher, followed by Jornada Elementary, who had 17.9 students per teacher. When I looked at the pupil administrator ratio, Booker T had the lowest PAR, which was 130 students per administrator. Sunrise had the most, 430 students per administrator. Any questions so far about elementary? Senora Flores?
And will Sunrise, is there plans to put an AP at Sunrise?
So, Madam President, this will be one of the budget discussions, that will occur, and that's the purpose of presenting this information, is so that you can see what areas do you,
Right.
you want to
But-
focus
But
on.
not right now. It's just part of the discussion. It's not, there's no plan for it.
Madam President, in the current year, as you may recall, we put some limits on what we would do. And we believe, to your point, Madam President, that is an ample discussion. One of the things that we're looking at, just to be honest, is the disparity high to low. And so if you took Booker T at 130, who's on the low end, and Sunrise at 430, a solution would be to simply flip that administrator. But there are reasons why we're where we are, and so that becomes the budget
No, and
dialogue we probably need to have.
I would understand that there are reasons for having two people at Booker T.
Yes,
versus
ma'am, and we don't disagree. These are just the analytics that we feel like are valuable for our discussion as we plot, future budget plans.
Okay. I like this chart very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's go ahead and move on to middle schools. Bill, or can the audience read that? Maybe we need to enlarge it just a little bit.
Yeah, splitting the signal is a bit of a problem, Madam President. We apologize. We'll have to
So I used the same methodology for the middle schools, and if you look across, we'll begin with Camino Real, who on the 80th day had 821 students, 1 principal, 2 assistant principals. They also have AES teachers who teach a class, so I took a portion of that. It's a green column, and I added it to the general ed teachers, music, PE, along with SPED teachers and bilingual teachers. And I got a total of 45.25 teachers for Camino Real, divided into the 821, which gave us a PTR of about 18.1 students per teacher. Looking at the PAR, the pupil administrator ratio, they have 1 principal, 2 assistant principals, so that's a total of 3 administrators. So that's a 274-to-1 ratio. When I look across the board, the average PTR for the district was 15.8 students to 1 teacher. The lowest PTR is at Picacho Middle School, which is 15.4 students per teacher. The highest is Camino Real Middle School at 18 students per 1 teacher. When I look at the administrators, the lowest PAR is at Picacho Middle School, 245 students per administrator, and the highest is Vista Middle School. They have 360 students per administrator. So you can see, there's a bit of a difference there. Again, you may want to consider that for budgetary discussions.
Again, Madam President, the current year, we're not intending on making any
Any
changes. Yes, ma'am.
Any questions from the board?
So I just wonder, as the unions looked at this,
Madam President,
would they like to make comment on it?
Yes, and I'm going to give them some time as soon as Dr. Marufo is finished, so that if they have questions. But the,
We hear about it.
yes, no, that's my intention. Dr. Marufo, the one thing that I start seeing here is equity issues, especially in AES. You have Picacho Middle School with only 1 AES facilitator, and yet they have a rather high population there, as to versus Sierra Middle School has 4. Now, I realize that it's a different population, but we should be looking for those gifted students everywhere. And that to me is an equity issue right there. So your chart points this out really well. Okay, and it's just a comment, I don't expect anyone to answer it right now.
Thank you. So next, we'll move on to high school. Thank you. So at the high school level, we see the 4 comprehensive high schools, Centennial, Las Cruces High, Mayfield, and Oñate High School. If we look across again, looking at the example, Centennial High School on December 1st had 1,548 students, as did Oñate High School. And Centennial High School has 1 principal and 4 assistant principals. They have .84 extended contracts. They have a librarian, a counselor. They have AES teachers, which I counted as half of their time is teaching a class. They have 1 SPED lead, 66.5 gen ed teachers, 15 SPED teachers, 2 bilingual teachers for a total count of 87 teachers. When I divided 87 into 1548, the PTR is 17.7 to 1. The pupil administrator ratio at Centennial High School is 310 students per administrator. So looking at the average PTR at the high school level for the district, it's about 18 students to 1 teacher. The lowest was Mayfield at 17.1 students per teacher. The highest was Oñate at 18.4 to 1 teacher. When I look at the district, the pupil administrator ratio, the district average is 314 students to 1 administrator. The lowest PAR is at Centennial with 310 students to 1 administrator. The highest is Oñate High School with 387 students per administrator. So in summary, I just pointed out some pieces, but in summary, there's a process involved when we begin preparing for staffing. Today, I presented you with just an overview, what I look at elementary, middle, and high school. I look across the board. Again, I want to reiterate that PTR does not equate to class size. When we begin to look at projections for the coming school year, I take into account the New Mexico Administrative Code that we utilize to give us the numbers for class sizes. As we prepare for budgetary decisions, I hope this information was useful for you in just being able to look across the board at each of our schools in comparison to each other.
Board members, questions? Yes.
Yeah, this is very beneficial stuff, but could you just tell me what AES is?
Advanced Educational Services, those are teachers of the gifted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Because I have, I look at Centennial High School and Oñate High School, they have exactly the same population. And when I look over to see how many counselors they have and AES facilitators, Oñate has a total of 6, and Centennial has a total of 11. So again, I see that this is a good tool to see what's going on there, and just to refine it. Can we go back to the middle school one? Because I remember seeing social workers on one of them, and I'm not sure if it was the middle school.
Yes,
Yes.
it's in the next to last column.
Like Lynn Middle School has 2 social workers, but no counselor. Is that correct?
So, Senora Flores,
Yes.
if I may, I think that is a school choice,
Okay.
which they prefer counselor,
Okay.
social worker, and in some cases, they have one of each.
Okay, and if it's a school choice, that's great. It's also true at Mesa Middle, they have 2 social workers. So, and Picacho has one of each. Okay.
Madam President, one of the things we have talked about with you as a board over time is how to handle our guidance and counseling and intervention with parents. And so one of the things that I did is we've allowed principals to make school-level choices
And
about how they best would do that. And this reflects that.
Yes, that's good. they should choose. I'm just pointing out what I see as different, whatever's
Absolutely.
different. Thank you, Dr. Marufo. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? This is excellent work. We appreciate it.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to go ahead and let Ms. Simpson speak. This is in regards to the budget, and Ms. Valdespino had asked me for some time as well, so.
Great, if I may. I would actually like to address the chart as well. And first of all, I would like to thank you for preparing this chart. It is the first step in a memorandum of understanding, which was to have a clear, equitable, fair, transparent, and verifiable formula for assigning FTEs for a school. So in other words, that as a community, we could look at the total number of students at a school and then have some idea of how to budget that, the staffing for that. So that information is really valuable. Of course, it doesn't necessarily translate to class size, but having that information gives the school community the ability to schedule appropriately, to ensure that we meet the statute for class sizes, but that we also meet the best needs of our students. We know that more one-on-one attention from a teacher, the smaller the class, the more attention from a teacher or an educational assistant, the better our students perform and the healthier they are in their environment. I'd also like to, this information was in the packet online. Unfortunately, the budget information was not online, so I didn't have the opportunity to review it carefully. I did look at some of the numbers on this, and I would like to draw attention to two different areas. One is the numbers for early college high school and the medical academy. I was interested in why they were not combined, since those institutions share students, and I think a more correct or a more, I don't know, reasonable number for that would combine the 21, not 23, but 21 from Arrowhead Park with the teachers from the two, I think, that you have it on there. I can't see it from here, which would give a teacher-student ratio of, I think, 22 or something. It would raise it considerably. Just wanted to add that. To segue into the budget discussion and the cash balance discussion, I would add the training and experience monies that was mentioned, that those numbers would drop, and I would just caution the whole community that those numbers will continue to drop as we lose really good, experienced teachers from the classroom. And they are retiring early, but they are also retiring because teaching is a calling, and it is something very different than it has been. It's become something different than it has been in years past. That is due to, and we've asked, we've surveyed our members and we've surveyed our teachers across the district. We had of 515 teachers who were surveyed about the evaluation, we had more than 50 of them say, we didn't ask, they offered that they were wanting to walk away from the profession. They were leaving the profession, they were retiring early, they were looking for other jobs. This was largely due, the reasons they gave, to an evaluation system that was demoralizing, unfair, and to us to no longer wanting to be complicit in a system of over-testing. These things are linked together for us because as we lose experienced teachers, we lose a generation of people who have given their lives to the classroom, and that is a loss for our students. And of course, as was pointed out by Mr. Dean, we also lose income because the state of New Mexico is, in its wisdom, has assigned more more money for the training and experience. It values and respects the teaching experience that teachers have. So with that in mind, I know that all is all sort of doomsday-ish, but I do have some good news, I think. I didn't know what the budget summit, the content of the budget summit, because there was no information in the budget packet. But we did do a study of cash balance for the first quarter of the last 4 years and found some really interesting information that I would like to share with the board.
Thank you.
You can keep it to just short, okay?
You'll recognize these. You can see in 2000, I've compared 2015-16, 14-15, 13-14, and 12-13. The total operational budget, and then the cash balance, the budget balance at the same point in the year for 4 years. Now, the good news is that we have $6,776,000 more dollars right now than we did last year at this time. You see our budget balance at the first quarter into first quarter. This includes, by the way, the encumbrance. The budget balance right now, as of the end of this report, which was, the first quarter, 20 million. 2014, it was 13.491 million. So that is good news for us. I also included, although Terry Dean will tell us that this number is not correct, but it is the number that shows up on the expenditure report, the FTEs for each quarter. Right now, in the first quarter budget report that the board received, in November, the FTE was 2,943. The year before, 2,998. Before that, 3,082. Before that, 3,149. So that is, I just wanted to point that out in the spirit of a budget summit, of back and forth, of sharing of information. That's.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. Does anyone have any questions?
Madam Chair, could I make a comment? I don't want to thank you for the information. One of the things I'm going to propose is that as we head into budget, these are the kinds of nuanced issues, and they are nuanced, that we have to look at. And I'm going to invite Ms. Simpson and others to sit down. When I was state public school finance chief from 87 to 91, we had similar kinds of debates at the state level. And what we found that was the best thing to do is to sit down around the table and really get our agreement around what the numbers are. And I'm going to invite us to do that over the next 30 days or so, because the cash balance is one of the issues that we can talk about. What we can't talk about today, unfortunately, is how much money we're going to get from Santa Fe, and that'll resolve itself. But this one's one we can lock in. I would tell the board that you can see there are different analytics happening, and I respect all of them, by the way. The issue is, let's get to the same analytics so we understand what we're talking about. I talked earlier about the end of the year. The end of the year is an absolute number. There's no question how much money's in the bank. It is absolute. And that's what we're focusing on. I think we're seeing with Ms. Simpson's presentation, others that I've seen, is that a dynamic during the year as certain things happen. And I would invite us to do that. I think if we can be together on what the numbers are, then we can talk about the real issues, which are the policy implications, Madam President, and others you're raising on the rest of the meat that's on the bone. And so I'd like to propose we do that as part of this summit process that we have. And so I'll rest on that, but thank you.
And I'll let CSEC Las Cruces speak to the budget summit. I would add that, yes, I think decisions are better informed when we have more voices at the table. And I don't think there is a question. These are not numbers that I calculated myself. These are straight from the board packets, from the first quarter budget report. I was hoping for this meeting to actually have the second quarter report, because these are snapshots in time, the same time of the year, for 4 years in a row. So that was, the reason I did it that way is so that it would capture the potential fluctuation. So.
And Madam
I look
President,
forward to seeing
I'm not questioning the data.
No.
I'm talking about the fluidity of budgets and the assumptions that underlie them. And that's why an agreement on the data is a really great starting point.
And I recommend that we keep this paper so that when we have the next quarter, then we'll be able to do a comparison as well. Andre?
Madam President, really quickly, I want to thank Ms. Simpson for kind of drawing our attention back to Arrowhead Park. One thing, if you look at the chart, there are no counselors for either Arrowhead or the Medical Academy. And those schools service so many students, and they do not have a resource. That's one thing that has come out of the Student Advisory Council that needs to be changed. I know that there's been an agreement to not bringing in any new people, but this is something that does need to be addressed.
Right, and we do have a social worker there now.
Madam President, there are a couple of things, and I want to thank Andrew for his comments. We've been discussing this with our Student Advisory Council. The nuance with the Arrowhead Park issue is that we have used college advisement that comes from Dynamic Community College and New Mexico State University, and that function is in large part the counseling function. Now, I think what Andre raises is a very important point, and that is how do we support students in need during that time? And that's the middle school social worker issue as an example that also is part of this. And Madam President, you're correct. After some unfortunate events this year, we have turned some personnel toward that. While they don't show in the assignment, because they're district level personnel, it's an approach to do that. And I appreciate the Student Advisory Council and their thoughts on this. We've sought their advice. Thank you.
And thank you for pointing that out again, because we had talked about it before.
Yes.
So
And
I appreciate that.
thank you.
Okay? So, Ms. Valdespino.
Thank you, Senora Flores, for allowing me to speak. Before I begin with my remarks, though, may I approach to give you a document?
Yes, you may.
Thanks. Oops, careful.
I don't have workman's comp anymore, huh?
So that's correct.
You have a better sticker than I do. Thank you.
I don't have any copies, do you?
We can share.
Okay.
Yes.
Here, if you'd like this one,
I
I'd-
go to-
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's some, let's know now.
I
that down.
miscounted, excuse me.
I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, I have another one.
It's all good.
Thank you. Okay.
No.
Senora Flores, members of the school board and superintendent rounds. When CSEC was in the process of resolving the furlough dispute with LCPS, CSEC believed that it was vital to include in the settlement resolution of having a budget summit. The budget summit is a required and critical component of the settlement resolution agreed by CSEC-LC and the district. The purpose of the budget summit is to clarify and implement the principles, process, and priorities that drive all budgeting and spending decisions made by the Las Cruces Public Schools in order to ensure integrity for the most efficient and effective management and expenditures of the district dollars to ensure a quality education for the children that LCPS serves. I invited CSEC-LC's sister union, NEA Las Cruces, to be a partner in the budget summit. Their participation is necessary as they too have a vested interest in the purpose of the budget summit. On January 21st, I sent an email to Superintendent Rounds and copied Chief of Staff Tim Hance requesting to meet to discuss the budget summit. I invited NEA Las Cruces Patrick Sanchez to attend with me. Also, in my email, I stated to invite Senora Flores because of the interest of the board in the budget. Although I did not get a response, I am glad to see the budget summit on this meeting's agenda. However, what has been represented by the superintendent is not a budget summit. My request to the board is for the district, CSEC Las Cruces, and NEA Las Cruces to plan a budget summit together to present to the parents, the Las Cruces Public School employees, and the community. And Senora Flores, thank you again. And would there be a possibility for a response from you and the rest of the members of the board?
Okay, board members, what say you about a potential budget summit? We are, the superintendent's intention is to do these discussions at our work sessions. Is that correct, Mr. Rounds?
Yes, ma'am, Madam President, and at a retreat, if appropriate. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm thinking we may need a retreat.
But Senora Flores and members of the school board, I gave you the document, this legal document that was signed off by Superintendent Rounds and myself. And it states, before February 28, 2016, the district shall conduct a budget summit to provide details of the 2015-16 school year expenditures and a history of the district fiscal decisions. That date, it was just around the corner.
Right,
That is
I'm
why I
aware.
sent an email to Superintendent Rounds, and I did not get a response in order to do this. And again, I stated the reasons and the purpose of the budget summit. It's not to just give information like it was done today. That is not a summit. A summit is an individual meeting, not part of a meeting that is included in the work session of a school board meeting.
Let me ask you this, Ms. Valdespino, how many people do you think would attend a budget summit, just so that we can get an idea of what would be needed?
Well, I would hope that it would be the board, Superintendent Rounds, Chief Financial Officer Terry Dean, principals, certified employees, classified employees, parents, students, members of the community. So, because we're talking about tax dollars. And everybody has an interest in how these tax dollars are being spent. So therefore, it has to be open to all members of the community and school staff, administrators, teachers, classified staff, and so forth, so there can be transparency. So we do not fall into the same crisis that we did before, and there would not be a furlough implemented that has hurt.
Right. Well, to do something like that would require a large space, larger than the boardroom. It would not be a board retreat. It would be more, how many hours do you see it would take to do something like this?
Senora Flores, members of the board, Superintendent Rounds, I can't say. That is why we need to get together and plan this. I have to say that CSEC Las Cruces and NEA Las Cruces have started working together along with NEA staff, Amy Simpson. Where are you, Amy? There you are. And also NEA New Mexico staff, Leslie Fritz. So we already have an idea of what we would like to share with you, and that is why I proposed a meeting with the superintendent to share our ideas.
Well, do you think, Mr. Rounds, we could go ahead and meet with CSEC and get an idea of what would be needed then?
Madam President, I'm sorry, first of all, Ms. Valdespino, that we didn't resolve the issue before this meeting. My intent is to meet with Irma, with CSEC, that's who the agreement is with, and try to iron out the pieces. The real issue here, Madam President and ladies and gentlemen, my attempt in moving, and I've told the board for the last month and a half or 2 months since our agreement, that budgets are bite-sized pieces for you to really get your arms around what's there. And what I proposed as an example of Ms. Simpson's presentation is a critical part of it. What are we going to agree to what these numbers are? Personal opinion is that after you vet out critical pieces, you're then prepared to have a better large picture discussion. My attempt hasn't been not to adhere to our agreement. My intention, in fact, has been able to make our agreement workable. The reality is that 100 or 200 people in a room doesn't allow the critical fact-finding and discussions probably that we need to do. So it's part and form. But I will pledge, Madam President, Ms. Valdespino, I'd be happy to meet with you individually as soon as I can get you on my calendar, and my chief of staff is at the back. And then, Madam President, I'll be happy to inform the board of what our discussions bring up. Again, I apologize to Ms. Valdespino and CSEC if they feel like I am not meeting their expectation. We weren't definitional about what this looked like when we did the agreement. And so I was trying to parcel this into bite-sized pieces for both the board, the public, and our respective unions. And so that's what I'm attempting to do.
Any comments from the board members in this regard? I mean, my biggest concern is having principals, parents, all together in one place. They don't have time. That's my concern. I'm to pull them away from their schools. But what is the opinion of the board members?
Madam President?
Go ahead.
Off the top of my head, I think when we have some stakeholders are critical, of course. It's got to be the board and the superintendent and staff. But when it comes to enlarging it to encompass other larger groups, I think it could be, we could agree on representation from, for example, the principals could have representatives, maybe 1 or 2 people. And we could condense the group and make it more manageable that way. Thank you.
That sounds like a good
Madam
idea.
President, could I go to that point?
Okay.
Because again, I'm seeking clarity from the board.
Yes,
So in your budget calendar we presented at your last meeting,
yes.
we have a budget advisory committee that is in fact that. So the view from my chair in trying to meet all of these parts was that gave us the oversight operational group that would help inform us as we move through budget discussions about how we communicate to that wider public. And so my view, and I apologize to Ms. Valdespino, was that taking up critical issues like we are today, getting out critical information in a timely manner so we can all look at it, discuss it, and agree to it. Having a budget oversight committee that includes membership from the unions, from the public, from the board, and others, becomes the oversight operating group. And as you move through time, as we're putting the budget together, that could provide perhaps a better dialogue than a one-time meeting of lots of folks, which tends, I'm afraid, to become many times a talk rather than an interaction. And we're just trying to balance this, Madam President.
I'm wondering if the talk is necessary, though, at this point. It seems like that's what I hear, the talk, the ideas that we're not necessarily hearing in this venue here.
And Madam President, I don't have any quarrel with that. It's just how you manage that.
Right, and Ms. Hall, did you have a comment?
I was just, yes, thank you. I was just going to say that having so many people trying to put something together would seem to be almost impossible. I think we need to start with smaller groups, smaller bites, and try to go from there, because I don't know how we could have all the-
Senora Flores and Ms. Hall, that's why I wanted to meet with the superintendent prior to this. That is why, so we can start planning and detailing. And unfortunately, I didn't get a response. So I understand where you're coming from, absolutely. And you know what? With a town hall meeting that has been held during the elections, and there are thousands and thousands of people, I think LCPS can have a budget summit as well. And I think we owe it to the community. We owe it to our students. We owe it to LCPS employees. So as far as saying it's such a big project, well, maybe the superintendent and I didn't think out the date very clearly. But keep in mind, this is a legal document at this point. We can have a memorandum of understanding that to move this date later, so there can be a more planning. But keep in mind, this is a legal document that was signed off by the superintendent and myself under the advice of legal counsel. So this is a legal document. It has something that has to move forward. And so I have to insist that we abide by this, because if not, we have another issue at hand. So so be it.
Okay.
Madam President, to that
And-
point, if I may, just
Yes.
one item. It is a legal agreement between CSEC and me. Madam President, that legally is the limited quantity of who the summit is. That was the agreement. If we want to go there, that was the agreement. We're talking well beyond that scope. And I believe it's not February 28th yet.
It says February 28th.
And I don't believe today is February 20th, Madam President. I believe it's
Today's
February 2nd, my
Second,
son's
yes.
birthday.
Okay. Well,
And keep in mind, that, again, that is why we wanted to meet with Superintendent Rounds, so we can discuss, and yes, it says, if we go to the nitty-gritty of the language, it does say that.
Yeah.
It does say that.
Yes.
But that's why I wanted to meet, so we can open it up. And this is gonna help negotiations.
Yes.
Preparation for negotiations.
And so what we need to do is to have that meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the next step, and then we will figure it out from there. I think that's what we need to do. And I thank you for bringing it forward. We're certainly going to pay attention to this, okay, Ms. Valdespino?
Madam
Yes.
President, I've been watching too many Republican debates, and I heard my name mentioned, my association. The superintendent is absolutely correct that this is part of CSEC's agreement. They invited us. We are stakeholders. We're happy to participate. I think we can help move things
Yes.
along. The superintendent is correct that we need to have common language as far as numbers are concerned.
Yes.
Last time, in our last bargaining sessions, there were many questions that came up, and you know, I'm not satisfied. I wasn't in bargaining, but there were very many questions that came up that I think Mr. Dean could help clarify
Okay.
during that
So
summit. So
we will
thank you.
move forward on this then, okay? And Mr. Landers, very briefly, okay, yes.
I'll try to be brief.
Yes.
I'm Glenn Landers. I just wanted to ask a question, something you said at the beginning of this discussion, that the superintendent was hoping that these short presentations during the board meetings would meet the requirements of the CSEC agreement. Is that what you said?
No, I'm sorry, he was signaling to me
Okay.
that it was part of it, okay? To see,
I just want to point out that CSEC apparently was not aware of that.
yes.
That
okay.
seems like a very strange way to meet the requirement of the agreement.
Okay, he can't hear you.
I'm
That's what he's complaining about. I'm sorry.
All right.
I can't hear two people at once.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yes.
I was saying that Senora Flores mentioned that the superintendent was hoping to meet the requirements of the CSEC agreement with these meetings with these budget summit talks during the board meetings. But CSEC seems to be unaware that that's his way of fulfilling the agreement. You know, it just flabbergasts me that he can do it all by himself without actually talking to the other party. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam
All
President,
right.
that does deserve a response.
Oh.
You see, by doing something like this, we have an opportunity to see if it begins to meet the common interests of everybody at the table. And if this isn't sufficient, Madam President, then we can discover it. It allows the board to look at it, a chance to fly. And while it may flabbergast this gentleman, it is part of a process of trying to determine a best approach in a fairly complex world of public school budgets.
I understand.
I've got to say that if this was an attempt to meet the requirements of the CSEC agreement,
Yes.
you should have told him. And it's paternalistic to say, I'm trying to do this to make everyone happy, when you don't even know what the other side wants.
All right, we're going to move on because we're not getting anywhere now, and I don't want to get stuck on this. I know that there's a lot of emotions here, and I think we need to listen to each other and be clear. And that meeting will happen, Ms. Valdespino, with the superintendent, and then we'll see where we go from there. We'll try and honor this situation as best we can. We're going to go ahead and move on to not operations, to instruction.
Instruct, Madam President, thank you.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Rounds. I just want to say how very pleased I've been to work with our student advisory group. They've been leading very interesting and engaging discussions, and at the last meeting, President Andre Gonzalez invited Equality New Mexico to come give a presentation on creating a fair and inclusive environment for all of our students. So, Andre, I'm going to ask you to take it away and introduce your speakers.
All righty, Madam President, members of the board, good evening. It's nice to be back on this side. It's interesting. So yeah, at our last meeting, before your last meeting, the Student Advisory Council heard a presentation from Equality New Mexico. And we heard presentation from students from Oñate High School. And this organization, that they are doing great work, in my opinion. And the Student Advisory Council voted unanimously to support Equality New Mexico in their endeavors. With us today, we have Amber Royster, who is the Executive Director of Equality New Mexico, as well as Jen Jefferson, who is the owner and operator of Prevention at Play, as well as Mayra Llerena, who is the Southern New Mexico Field Coordinator for Equality New Mexico. So with that, I want to turn it over.
Thank you very much, Andre.
Thank you, Andre. Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Rounds, thank you so much for having us. I am Amber Royster, Executive Director of Equality New Mexico. We are the state's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender civil rights organization. And with me is Jen Jefferson of Prevention at Play, as well as our Southern New Mexico Field Coordinator, Mayra Llerena. She's an Oñate High School graduate as well, and based here in Las Cruces, running our field office here. We are all a part of the New Mexico Safe Schools Initiative, along with other organizations, and one of the things that we are working on are creating safer school environments for all students. And one of the ways that we can do that quite effectively is through what we call a Safe Zones program. And these programs have been implemented in both Santa Fe and Albuquerque school districts, which are the closest comparable size to Las Cruces. And part of the reason that these are important is because they address the needs of some of the most marginalized student populations. So the next slide, if you could. Some of the marginalized student groups that Safe Zones really impact, LGBTQ students, obviously, they're an important focus. We know that they experience twice the rate of bullying in our schools than non-LGBT students. And we also know that transgender students experience, 78% of trans students actually have been bullied or harassed on school campus. Undocumented students and students of color are also a marginalized population group, though only 8% of US-born students do not complete high school. 28% of undocumented students who have arrived before the age of 14 do not complete high school. Students with disabilities, we know that at least 60% of students with disabilities report being bullied on school grounds. So the idea of a Safe Zone program, it really is about creating safe spaces in the school environments, and I'm going to allow Jen Jefferson to talk a little bit more about the Safe Zone program, as she was one of the original implementers of the program in Santa Fe Public School District.
Next slide, please. Wonderful. So Safe Zones programs, they have a history since the early 90s where they started on college campuses. They've spread to high schools, middle schools, and elementaries. And really the main purpose of why having these programs is all those marginalized students on that last slide. It really targets a way to protect those students, to help them feel safer, to feel more included. And when these young people feel more...
Can you speak more into the microphone? We're
Sure.
having problems hearing.
So when these, there we go. When these marginalized students have an identified supportive ally, they feel safer, they feel more included. There actually is research that shows that when they feel this way, their grades go up, they have increased GPAs, they have increased attendance, and they have increased plans on attending college or some other post-secondary school. So the Safe Zones program, it is a comprehensive training program. It is with school staff on site. And so it actually identifies with a sticker, with a postcard, with a poster, and it identifies these teachers, these educators who want to be identified as a safe zone, that they are a safe place to come to. And really it typically delineates and identifies that it's for, the students are, all students are welcome regardless of race, ethnicity, class, body type, body size, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, language. So really, it's listing out some of the ways that these students are welcome. And that really promotes a culture of diversity, culture of inclusion, and it really dovetails with bullying prevention efforts, with truancy, with graduation rates. So there's many, many ways that this benefits all students. Really, whenever we are protecting the most marginalized students, we're benefiting all the students. Could I get the next slide, please? Thank you. So what is Safe Zones, right? So it's school-wide, ideally it's district-wide. It's an ongoing effort. It's not a one-shot deal. It's an ongoing effort throughout the entire school year, each year. Often it's centered on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer youth, as well as the other marginalized populations, but again, it is for all students. Uses that sticker, that poster, that visual identifier that says this is a safe zone. And one of the best practices that we've seen around the country is when the school district involves a community planning team. When local organizations that have subject matter expertise are brought in to be part of that planning team, and this is what Santa Fe did. One, it took a lot of the burden off the district. It brought in some expertise and helped them. And two, then you had more buy-in, more input, and just really more brains around the table helping promote this. And the Safe Zones program, it would include your counselors, it would include your nurses, your school staff, and your teachers. So for the nurses and counselors in some of these programs, sometimes participation is mandatory because by the nature of their job, that is something that they should be considered a safe zone. However, for teachers, for other educational assistants, it's a volunteer basis where these teachers say, hey, I want to be a safe zone. I want to put the sticker up. I want my students to know they can come to me if they're having a challenging time, whether it's something at home, whether it's a relationship, and I can help redirect them to resources. So it is important that the teachers and the other educational staff, that it is volunteer for them. Now, we all know how hard teachers work and how overstretched they are, so it is an important component of the program that it's incentivized in some way, that the trainings take place, and typically it's 2 to 4 throughout the year, but that these trainings take place maybe during the school day and subs are covered, or if they happen in the afternoon or on weekends or some sort of stipend that really compensates them for their extra time.
So it's always fun getting to talk about the cost of new programs after you've had a budget discussion. But of course, there are some costs affiliated with this program, but they're not as large as you would think. So there's definitely a program coordination cost. However, in the other school districts where safe zones are currently happening, this isn't a new position. This is an existing position that really is more of a point person to make sure that things are getting scheduled, to make sure that there's an interaction that's happening with the collaborative team, with the community. So there is some program coordination cost. Obviously, the staff time, we talked about that, paying for substitutes, paying potentially for participation stipends. In terms of the way that Santa Fe does it, I know that they have some in-service type day things that they arrange as well. Meeting logistics, of course. You get a lot of people in the room, you want to feed them, probably. So there's probably some food costs, some logistics costs like printing. But in terms of the actual training, which really revolves around cultural competency primarily, but also how to intervene in particular instances, there are a ton of resources in our community that will provide all of that training for free. And the New Mexico Safe Schools Initiative is one of those resources. And one of the handouts that you all received was an explanation of what the New Mexico Safe Schools Initiative is, but an entire menu of options of the types of trainings that we can conduct as a part of the New Mexico Safe Schools Initiative. We are grant funded. This is a part of our mission as the New Mexico Safe Schools Initiative, so we're prepared to come in and just deliver these trainings, provided that we have the blessing of the district. Now, next slide, please, if you don't mind. I think the next question, of course, is where do we start, right? How do we get this going? Because, new program, it feels really big. It actually isn't that big. And again, we're here to help. But, some sort of a formalization of the Safe Zone program is important, whether that be via district policy, whether that be via directive from the superintendent. There should be some sort of a formalization of this program and ideally some sort of community buy-in. A Safe Zone coordinator for the district should be identified, definitely, somebody who's going to be that point person. And then it's involving the community. Get your community collaborators on board. The New Mexico Safe Schools Initiative would want to be a major community collaborator in this way. And that actually is is a project that involves multiple organizations. And so you wouldn't just be getting Equality New Mexico. You'd be getting the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. You'd be getting the New Mexico GSA Network. You'd be getting Prevention at Play. And then, of course, the idea would be for us to come down and make sure that this training happens in local entities so that this can be continued to be delivered in the school district without, us coming down from Albuquerque to do that. We want to make sure that that happens here and is localized for the needs of the district. The next thing that would need to happen is scheduling a safe zone orientation, which is something that we would be happy to do, and then, of course, promoting that among school staff to try to identify which teachers and educators, might be interested in being in a safe zone. And again, I want to stress what Jen said. It's really important that all counselors are a safe zone. It's really important that this is a part of a counselor's duties, just regardless, across the board. And then the next step in getting started is looking at what would our training schedule look like? What could we afford, really? Because it is also about the capacity of the district. And we have two different programs between Santa Fe and Albuquerque right now. We have Santa Fe, they do have a lot more money in their district, and so they're able to devote a lot more time to this. And I think, how many trainings a year do they have? 4 trainings a year is what they have, whereas in Albuquerque Public Schools, they have a single person kind of running that program, and they only have a couple trainings a year. And so really it is a lot about capacity. And going back to that, that's why it really is important to involve the community with this type of program, so that it can be a little bit more robust than the way Albuquerque's doing it right now. We keep trying to work with them to get ourselves involved, but right now they have it located with a single person, and it's just not as robust as it possibly could be, especially with all these free resources on the table that we are literally chomping at the bit to deliver to school districts. So with that, last slide, it's the really simple one. We're here to help. This is what we do. We're subject matter experts in these sorts of things. We do policy work up in Santa Fe around this, and then we do the public education work down in the community. And, as far as Equality New Mexico is concerned, we finally have a permanent home down here in Las Cruces. We have an office. Mayra is here, doing incredible work. And we would just love the opportunity to help create safer environments in Las Cruces public schools. So with that, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Amber. Board members or anyone have any comments, questions? Yes, Mr. Castro.
Yeah, Madam President. It's very heartening to see programs like this. They're not only essential, they're critical, and they're needed. And nationwide, it is a tremendous problem. And I think that this kind of program will be addressing it. I really commend you on that. And but where have they been implemented before, and what were the results?
Sure. So
other districts
in the state of New Mexico?
Well, no, not necessarily just New Mexico, but some regional. So the outcome of what has been the outcome of some of these?
Sure. I'm going to let my colleague Jen talk to that.
So I'll tell a little story, because I like telling stories when I can. So as a young lesbian in college, right, there weren't a lot of out folks, a very different environment than there is now, and I was really struggling in my math course, really struggling. But my math professor had a sign-up that said safe zones. And so even though I did not go in and talk about any of my personal stuff going on, I felt safe enough and welcomed enough to go in and get the tutoring that I needed. Mm-hmm. I've heard that story from many of our students. I've heard many students tell stories about how they never actually went and talked to the safe zone person, but they felt so much safer that they were there and that they knew they could if something came up. On the flip side, the stories that teachers tell is that they've wanted to be supportive and they want to be there for the students, but they didn't know what resources to recommend. Mm-hmm. And that's where that training piece comes in. They said, oh, I feel like I know how to help the students. Before I wanted to, but now I feel like I know how to. I would say across the country that there are safe zones in probably more districts than they're not, especially in larger cities. I would say probably almost all campuses, college campuses, have them at this point. And the newest trend is that even the elementary schools are having safe zones program, because when we look at really the root of bias and bullying, that's really starting in our elementary schools.
So, Madam President, could I go there for just a minute? Because I really appreciate the presentation. Some good things with this is you have local ability to assist. You have a state organization that can provide the service and assistance. I'm aware of the program in both Albuquerque and in Santa Fe. And Albuquerque has 83,000 students, over 100 schools, and they have one person committed to it. Santa Fe's in a much better stead in the way they've approached that. Part of that may be because of some local assistance that I think happened early maybe. And I would urge us as we have this dialogue to look at those kinds of features about how to get there. Because even in a tough budget year, a lot of times coalescing resources around something we want to do is important. Last point I'll make, Madam President, is in every classroom, I would hope that our students will find a safe zone where the relationship between the teacher and the student, regardless of what the issues are, is one of trust and of relationship. And I'm proud of our teachers in this district because I believe that across most, if not all, that's where it's at. So I really appreciate this. And Andre, if I could, Madam President, to you, I want to thank the Student Advisory Committee for lighting this up. I know this is one of your particulars that you brought forward as a group. And thank you for bringing this to us to listen to.
Welcome.
And thank you, Mr. Rounds. I think that one of the, depending how board members feel, if we should sort of start looking at policy to formalize this, I think if we are all in agreement in that regard, we can have some, if you have some samples of policy, and then send them to Ms. Galvan. I'll let you work with her. We did have a lot of high school principals here. I think there's still a few here that might be a potential contact. One of the things that you think you know everything, right? But then you realize you don't. The fact that there are other types of marginalized students and immigrants being primary. I never thought about that, and I think that I know that there is problems, but I never thought about it in this way. So we need to have safe zones in all our schools, and I can't think of why we wouldn't. So thank you for educating us on this. Let's work on policy. And let's start a relationship with this organization. Thank you very much for the work you do.
Madam President.
Yes.
Should we possibly put some kind of deadline on, a schedule on when, this policy will be brought forth?
Madam President, may I recommend to the board that as Joe meets with them, what I'm going to ask that we do is I believe Santa Fe has the most appropriate policy perhaps, and I'm going to ask our presenters if we can connect up Joe with them to pull the Santa Fe policy down. I would love to see this board consider these issues in this spring before we get to summer, because it would set us up for at least a starter process into next year. It would also maybe inform your budget decisions.
Correct.
In that vein, so it'd be very timely perhaps to move out at that pace.
Well, I think we have to go after all the free things first, right?
Madam President, I think the cost in this, honestly, the presentation that we have available help is compelling in these tight financial times, and I know this board seeks to reach out to the community and get those kinds of involvements, so certainly invite that, but if we could, that would help us with resource, and to Mr. Frank's point, I don't think it's beyond the scope to be able to have this as something that would be done by May, perhaps looked at in the final budget analysis coming in, which would be late April, early May, and so it may come together in a nice, timely fashion.
And maybe just giving us some of those signs and having them available for the principals, let's just start there. I mean, like you said, there didn't even need to be a conversation, it was just understood. So that's really great, thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to move on to board items. And we have, to start off with, we have a discussion and approval of continued use of existing law firms to provide general legal services. Now, this goes to, in addressing some of the concerns of the the Secretary of Education saying that I fired somebody, mostly Mr. Sanchez. I don't recall ever saying that I fired him, but basically, I told him that I was going to seek different legal counsel. And under one of our policies, I think it's BDG, is that correct, or BGD? It says that the board president and/or the superintendent have the right to seek legal counsel. So in my wisdom, in my own way of doing it, I started talking to another legal firm, and lo and behold, I checked with Mr. Dean to make sure that I was reaching out to someone that had been approved. And as you know, Walsh Gallegos was on an approved vendors list. Now, I'm sorry that somehow I insulted Mr. Sanchez from Cuddy and McCarthy Law Firm in saying that we were going to start using someone else. And that was not my intention, and the district is able to use the Cuddy Law Firm and Walsh Gallegos and Modrell Sperling. Those are the three law firms that were selected and were voted on in 2012. And at that particular meeting, Ms. Hall, Mr. Davis, and myself, I guess we were the only ones at that particular meeting, but we voted to accept these three law firms. So when I looked at using another law firm, I went to Walsh Gallegos and said, okay, this is who I want to work with. And so then as a courtesy, I called Mr. Sanchez and let him know that I was going to do that. And then this misunderstanding kind of bubbled up that I was exerting or stepping out of my authority, but I had already read the policy that said as board president I could do this. So then I proceeded. And then and then we have these problems that we are having a rolling quorum, etc., that I'm violating the Open Meetings Act. I had talked to Ms. Gallegos and I said, if the board is uncomfortable with this, I will be happy to take it to a vote, because I don't want to be the decider in this. I knew that we weren't agreeing with Mr. Sanchez previous to this. So that's why I was looking for other counsel. I'm trying to make sense of everything that we do here on the dais, but I'm not trying to overstep my authority in any way. But that has been misunderstood. So then the three law firms are Cuddy McCarthy, Walsh Gallegos, Modrell Sperling. These three law firms were selected through the RFP process in 2012 to provide legal services to Las Cruces Public Schools. The minutes of the June 19th, 2012 board meeting reflect that the board approved the general contract to all three firms to provide legal services to LCPS. The minutes of the June 19th, 2012 meeting and the three contracts are included as part of the board packet. The June 19th minutes indicate that Mr. Davis, Ms. Hall, and Ms. Flores were all present. Mr. Davis made the motion to approve the three firms, Ms. Hall seconded it, and the motion carried. We did not need to place this item on the agenda or take action on it in order to continue to use these firms. However, due to the concerns expressed at our last board meeting, as board president, I asked that it be placed on the agenda for discussion and action. So now I'm asking board members, do we need to repeat this vote? And please feel free to comment.
Madam President?
Yes.
No, I don't see any need to repeat it. I mean, we have an existing board policy, and what's the purpose of revoting on it?
Okay.
So I'm in favor of just letting the status quo continue.
Okay.
May
Ms.
I
Hall?
say, I have no quarrel at all Our board policy says that you and the superintendent have the right to consult with an attorney. It does not say that in the middle of everything, you have the right to, when Andy Sanchez called me, he said, and I quote, "Maria fired me yesterday." He was working on board policy that needs to be revised. You took that from him, I understand, and instead of letting him continue to do that, you just completely changed to the Gallegos firm. That is my quarrel.
Okay, and when I talked to Ms. Galvan in addressing your concern, I talked to Ms. Galvan when Ms. Gallegos was here, and I told her, let Mr. Sanchez finish in the month of January. I did not want to cut it off so that there would be jagged pieces here and there. Let him, if he wants to finish Title IX or whatever it was he was working on, I don't remember, there were some pieces, then I went ahead and as we would start with Ms. Gallegos as of February 1, or after we took it to a vote, okay? So Mr. Sanchez misunderstood me, and I expected Ms. Galvan to then contact him and explain that to him. So I don't know if that conversation was ever held, okay? Anyone else have any comments on this or concerns?
Yeah, President, to me, it seems very, very clear that you didn't violate any protocols or you were within policy. I don't see how we fired Mr. Sanchez. It's still in that group of 3 people that our board is authorized to use, and we can go back to Andy Sanchez anytime we want to. And nobody fired him. I think that for a number of reasons, and I agree with some of them, we're entitled to get our own, that we feel confident and we feel that we can, very trustworthy, and again, that can communicate with us. And I think we did the right thing, and we did it under the law. And there's no reason for us to vote again on something that has already been voted upon. So that's my comment.
Mr. Davis?
Well, I tend to agree with Maury, but I feel that you have done what was necessary under the laws, and I don't see any reason to have to take another vote on it.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask, we seem to have a more or less an idea that we don't need to repeat this vote. How, do we just take it off the table?
Madam President, an appropriate action would be to take a tabling motion on this and to table it, and that it would be removed from consideration.
And I just want to let everyone know that we will again be voting on this. There will be a new RFP, as I understand it, this year. Is that correct, Mr. Dean?
That is correct.
So then we will then vote on it yet again for another, how long do these RFPs last?
Madam President, these RFPs are multiple year, 4 years in this case.
4 years.
And it is our intention to bring you, as our standard practice, a list of firms that would be those that you would choose
Okay, so
for your long-term use.
okay, thank you. So then I will entertain a motion to table this.
So move.
Second?
Okay, and we have a first and a second. Any discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
Table it to win, I don't know what circumstance.
Well, just take it off.
Madam President, let me go there just procedurally. Mr. Davis, as you know, it's on your agenda as an action item. So you are disposed to take an action. A tabling action would remove it permanently from the record as consideration and dispense with it. It doesn't change the issue of bringing forward a future recommendation from us after an RFP has been put out.
Yes.
It will occur this spring. It must occur before July the 1st, because that's when these contracts with these firms terminate. That's our intention right now, is to do an April RFP and a May affirming action which would give the board that if there were debate, the month of June to resolve any discrepancies you might have.
So then, you have another comment?
I was going to make an amendment to my motion to table
Okay.
it permanently.
Permanently, okay. So then he's making the motion, and do we have a second?
I'll support that, yes.
Okay, so
We have to address that first.
this one first. All right, so then, let's take a vote on Mr. Castro's tabling this permanently until the new RFP.
Madam President, so let me walk through the procedure. I think, Ms. Davis, where you're going is because Mr. Castro has suggested an amendment.
An amendment.
Your first action will be to amend the motion to permanently table, and then the
Okay.
second motion will be to, on that overarching motion to table it permanently. So you'd take, one is to amend.
Okay, so then I will entertain a motion to amend the motion.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, Madam President, you're on the point that you were on previously, you thought, before
Yes.
Mr. Davis's point of order.
Did you vote? Yes. Okay, I'm just checking.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, Madam President, now the motion that is on the table is to permanently table this item.
Okay, so now, he has entertained a motion to permanently remove this from, permanently table this discussion.
And Madam President, may I just
This
suggest for
vote.
clarity that we go back through a motion,
Okay.
a second, and
All
then
right,
action.
I will entertain a motion to permanently table this vote.
I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. All right. Any comments? Okay. We're going to move on to discussion of one law firm to serve as board counsel to include matters of school board governance and operation and board powers and responsibility to set forth Section 22-5-4 NMSA and board policy. Now, I would like to read an executive summary of this, if I may. The board policy BDG states, legal counsel for the Las Cruces Public Schools is appointed to serve the Board of Education. Therefore, regardless of the assigned legal task, all Las Cruces Public School attorneys serve the board. Board policy BDG states the board president and the superintendent are authorized to consult with the board's attorney as needed. Board policy BDG does not require that the board president or superintendent confer with one another or obtain board approval before consulting with the board's attorney or agree upon which attorney to be consulted. When I consulted with Ms. Gallegos of Walsh Gallegos, I did so under the authority given to me by board policy BDG. I did discuss with Mr. Rounds, Superintendent Rounds, my decision to consult with Ms. Gallegos, and I understood him to be pleased. And it was also, Mr. Davis was present in that discussion. In order to avoid future controversy over which attorney is consulted on board-related matters, I recommend that we carve out the role of board counsel to select one law firm to handle board-related matters. I recommend that the role of board counsel include matters of school governance and operations and board powers and responsibilities as set forth under Section 22-5-4 NMSA and Board Policy Section B, School Board Governance and Operations. Section 22-5-4 NMSA 1978 is included as part of the board packet. I invite discussion regarding whether we should carve out the role of board counsel and select one law firm to handle board-related matters, and if so, which law firm? So, time for discussion. Yes, Ms. Hall.
Madam Chair, I have several thoughts about more than one firm representing us. I have no problem with having the three. I think it certainly makes sense to have a local firm for the kinds of items we've used the local firm to represent us. I don't see any problem with having three, and if the RFP comes down to the point where it's sensible, then it's worked so far.
Okay, so any other thoughts on this? Thank you, Ms. Hall.
I'm inclined to agree with Mrs. Hall also on that. I don't see where there's a problem having the three to choose from, and I don't see a need to have one appointed as, the term used is, what's the term? I can't find it.
Let's see.
Board counsel.
As board counsel, yes.
I could be convinced that that's a positive step, but at this point, I don't see the need for it.
Okay. Anyone else would like to say anything in this regard of having one as board counsel? No?
You guys?
Yes, I'm asking the both of you, yes. Any comments?
Well, I would just soon have to be able to appoint one
Okay.
that are responsive to us and myself or our.
That's what this is about, yes. Mm-hmm. So you think that we could take a vote on it and see how it comes? Okay? Mr.
I have no
Gusto?
comment at this point. No.
Pardon me?
No comment.
No comments, okay. So shall we go ahead and go through the vote and see how it turns out? Any
Madam
comments, Mr. Rounds?
Some advice, if I could, Madam President, and, you know, the board may act as you so see fit, so please don't misunderstand. I think there is a clarity in the proposed, the proposed action item in the one law firm option. It doesn't necessarily limit you to using all of the firms. But I think a point of conjecture, Madam President, I just heard you talk about with the other firm is the confusion about who is playing which role. And as I said earlier in the last meeting, I think for clarity purposes, an action of the board might be in order to,
A good thing.
to do that. I would also think with, as you mentioned, the letter from the secretary, it would eliminate any suspicion, suggestion that somehow, Madam President, you are acting individually. It puts on the record the board's position in this clearly. And so if I would offer recommendation to you, and Mr. Frank, you said you're open to discussion, from my chair and my 31 years of playing superintendent in districts in New Mexico, it's a clarifying point, and while it may not be necessary, it might be best to be clear.
A good time to do this.
Madam President, that would be
All
my
right.
recommendation.
Okay. So then, does anyone else have any comments?
So, is this something we can vote on tonight?
Yes.
We can move it, and we would name the firm in the
Yes,
motion?
that would be the next part, I think.
Madam
Well,
President,
no,
that's-
actually, it's part of this.
Madam President, it is item 3 on the agenda. The item is selection and approval of one law firm to serve as board counsel. And what I think I heard Madam President say, I'm sure I heard her say, was that for the specific items she just discussed under item 2, for those purposes, Walsh Gallegos would be your choice of counsel. It doesn't preclude you from using others for other reasons, but it would give clarity to that assignment on behalf of the board. And I just recommend, given the theater of operations that has emanated from this, that would, I would suspect, be a solution set you might wish to consider.
Any other comments before we start the vote here?
Am I to understand that this is just for this particular time until the RFP comes up for the next vote?
Madam President, if I may clarify, this particular action would be for the contracts in order today, which would end June 30th, 2016, or upon an action by the board to select firms on the next RFP cycle. So for my chair, as I shared, the calendar we've been working with is an April RFP and a May action by the board to select firms. And then if the board, if Walsh Gallegos were among those that were affirmed in that RFP, they responded, they were selected, they met the vetting criteria, which I suspect they might, but until the RFP happens, I can't tell you what'll happen.
Right.
Then after that, you could act similarly to reinitiate this relationship or not at the decision of the board. Or how, you can move about using all three. I mean, you have a wide array of options. This is current time, and Madam President, until the RFP process can complete itself.
Okay, so then, if no one has anything else, I'm going to go ahead. I know, Andre, you had something to say about this. Do you want to say it before or after the vote?
About this particular
Yes.
item?
No. Oh, okay, it's coming up.
It's
Never
coming up,
mind.
yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Okay, so then I will now entertain a motion to approve the Walsh Gallegos Law Firm to act as counsel for the Board of Education.
I so move.
Okay? We have a first and we have a second. Any other discussion? Okay, so then, all in favor?
Aye.
Hey,
Aye. Nays?
I'll abstain.
Okay, we have 4 ayes and 1 abstention. So then, this is now clear for,
Yes, ma'am.
for future use, okay? All right, now, the next item on the agenda is a discussion and comment regarding Secretary of Education's directives to Board of Education. Now, here we come to the crux of the meeting, and we're sorry to the bond folks that we have to have further discussion, okay? It's getting to be long. Anyone have any comments or discussion? Andre, would you like to start?
Yes, ma'am. So yesterday, I met with some members of the Student Advisory Council. We talked about this, and we wrote up a statement in response to what is going on. So with your permission, I'd like to read that aloud.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It is disheartening to see that Secretary Scandera has resulted to using political grandstanding and maneuvering to distract from the issues that students face not only in LCPS, but around the state of New Mexico. The Annie E. Casey Foundation just recently ranked New Mexico as a state with the highest rate of childhood poverty. The Education Week Research Center ranked New Mexico as the 49th state for overall educational quality. And students still have serious issues with the institution of the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. And yet, instead of addressing these issues and harrowing statistics, we are forced here to talk about meeting minutes and the proper use of them. As a Student Advisory Council, we stand by our school board, and we urge both school board members and district officials to not fall into this political rhetoric, and instead to continue to stay focused on what really matters, which are the students. Thank you.
We need to listen to the students more, I think. Go ahead, comments.
I would just like to say that I agree with Andre. I think that the time, effort, and energy spent on this whole issue has been a real mess. However, I think that if we are, as a board, are not offering the transparency and the openness that we need to do for this community, that we need to examine it carefully and see what we can do about it.
Yes, I agree. Thank you, Ms. Hall. Board members, open to discussion.
I was going to make comments at the end of the meeting under board comments.
Okay, all right. You don't want to do them now at this particular time?
Maybe not.
Okay, all right, so Mr. Davis, any comments in regards to the Scandera, the Secretary Scandera's letter? Sorry.
In what way?
No, it's fine.
Her remarks are, in my opinion.
Speak into the microphone,
what I
please.
have to turn
Yes,
on,
yes,
right? That's tough, guys. No, I just think that she was beyond, she just stupefies me, I guess, is what to say. And these allegations, you know, the whole world knew about the allocations before I did.
That's true.
And actually, I just got the letter on Friday last week. So here I am, I didn't understand what she was saying or why she's saying it, so I just think that we need to clarify the record.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Castro?
Yeah, I'd like to say a couple of things. I think that the letter was so far out that, again, it went to people like Russell Allen before we did. We got it. It went to the press before we got it. And I think it was a total lack of respect for the citizens of this community that voted us into the board positions. I've gotten feedback from a lot of teachers, a lot of community people, and they all agree with us. If you can read the paper, you can see the comments that are being made, not the sound off part, but the real opinions. So I'd say that Andre, yay on what you said, and I even propose we have some kind of resolution that we did the right thing, we did what we were elected to, and that we refute the allegations from A to Z. And I might even welcome an Attorney General investigation. Thank you. That's it.
Yes, go ahead.
Before we refute the entire thing, I think we better examine carefully what she said. She mentioned, and I will read from her letter, that the board president stated that the board would like board representation at all principal meetings for the purpose of evaluating the superintendent. And that was never discussed in a board meeting at all. I knew nothing about it, and I don't know if the rest of you did, but I certainly didn't. The other thing, when you asked the superintendent to leave the meeting, it was a retreat at the PDC, so that he would not be part of the discussion about, and I don't even, something about when the principals were all there. I certainly knew, you said that it had been decided that we would ask. I never heard anything at all about that. I would have objected. And I wonder, when you hired the attorney to investigate the LEAP program, was that attorney a representative of one of the law firms that we have contracted with?
Okay. In regards to, let me look and see what the first thing you said.
I said something about the board representative, or have a board representative at all the principal meetings.
That has always been just a request that I've asked the superintendent, not to be at every principal's meeting, but to have the board members rotate through the principal's meetings, because we evaluate him on how he works with our principals. And I don't see it as, it was just a request. It wasn't something that I discussed with board members. It was just a request from myself, even before I became president. I just thought it was a good idea. And that's all that was. Okay, when I asked him, and I asked, I didn't demand or throw a fit to ask him to leave. It's because when you talk to employees, you don't want the boss around. It was nothing that I had, that anyone was going to say anything. Other staff personnel was there. It was just kind of a common sense approach. If principals are going to come in, let's ask the superintendent to step out for a few minutes, just so that they can feel free. Nothing, where no action was taken, I did not ask anyone. I just asked the superintendent. It wasn't a vote, okay? Then, these are just my ideas. Some of them are good, and some of them are bad. I'm not saying that they're all wonderful. So Mr. Rounds was insulted that I asked. I understand. and I'm sorry. It's not my purpose to insult. The last thing, what was it again?
About hiring the attorney to investigate.
That was a little bit more complicated. There were issues. I had sat in meetings after meetings of talking to staff, so much so that I went home and cried. It was nothing that I was asking for. I was not seeking these people out. They were coming to me. So then I talked to Mr. Dean and I said, I think we need an investigator. And this is when we got in trouble the first time. And that has since been resolved. So the Secretary of Education has gone way back to last year on things that have already been resolved and bringing them back up for discussion. We don't need to go there. They were resolved by, Mr. Sanchez helped us resolve those at that particular time. So we don't have to rehash this. These are things that happen. But I was working with our district, trying to stay focused, getting the votes in on time, getting everyone ready, but sometimes things happen. So I did the best I could. Did I make mistakes? Probably. I take responsibility for these mistakes. But I'm learning. I'm learning about these, and that's why hence she wants us to be trained. Okay, so do we need the training? I don't think so, but will we comply? If we have to. We go to training. We were there in December. We're going to go back this month in February. So we're going back to train. Now, I actually have a summary for you as well. As I stated to the newspaper, I have read the Secretary's letter and I am deeply troubled by it. While I do not agree with the factual accuracy of the allegations contained within the letter, I want to be clear that I am committed to working with state agencies to address these concerns. More importantly, I intend to stay focused on my role as board president and member of the board and the mission of the district to serve its students, parents, and community. I believe that the Secretary's letter of 1/26/16 is filled with inaccuracies. For example, Ms. Scandera states in her letter that I removed the district longtime attorney and engaged a new attorney without the board approval of the board. Ms. Gallegos of Welch Gallegos is not a new attorney. Welch Gallegos was approved by the board to provide legal services in 2012 by a motion made by Mr. Davis and seconded by Mrs. Hall. Under policy BDG, the board president has the authority to consult with any of the board attorneys. I do not believe I exceeded my authority as board president. My authority comes from this policy. Secretary Scandera is incorrect when she indicates that only the superintendent, as chief executive officer, or the board as a whole, which was actually in the newspaper, that is not correct, is authorized to consult with the board's attorney as needed. It's the board president and/or the superintendent. Policy BDG even addresses how to handle disagreements among board members about accessing legal counsel. It states if the superintendent and the board president refuse to consult the board's legal counsel on a matter raised by at least two board members of the board, and here for some reason I ran out, the attorney shall respond to a request for information made in writing to the firm by the two members. Now, we actually voted on that policy to make it indeed policy that two members of the board can ask to put something on the agenda. They also have the same right to do so with an attorney. As board president, I recommend we respond to the allegations of the directives in the cooperative and respectful manner. I believe it is the district's best interest to respond through board counsel. So then I move on to the next item on the agenda. I invite discussion and comment regarding the Secretary of Education's 1/26/16 directives to Board of Education. I further invite invite discussion on my recommendation that we take action today to direct board counsel to prepare a response to the Secretary of Education's directives to the Board of Education, including reviewing the allegations, which we've started doing, advising the board, and preparing a response. So that's where we are now. That moves us on to 5. Approval to direct board counsel to prepare a response to Secretary of Education directives to Board of Education to include reviewing the allegations, advise the board, and prepare the response. Are we ready to do that?
I so move if you,
Well, let me make the motion, okay? Ms. Hall?
Could I just say
Yes.
that on so many occasions, I feel that there must have been some discussion among 1 or 2 or 3 people on the board, because there were so many of these things I never knew anything at all about. And I'm wondering about rolling polls. Just clear as that.
Okay, and I've just told you that there
And
there was no discussion.
How did Ed and Maury know to come to meet Elena Gallegos the day that you brought her in?
I told, who did I tell? I think I let Mr. Castro know that she was going to be here. And Mr. Castro, did you then invite Mr.
repeat
Frank?
that again, please.
Okay, when Ms. Gallegos came, I told you that she was going to be here, and she
Yeah.
would be willing to meet
Yeah,
with board
I
members.
think I called you in.
Mr. Davis and I had met her for lunch, to meet her. And then I had already told the superintendent she was coming, and he told me that he was not going to be here.
Right.
I did not know you were going to be out of town.
I was.
I know.
Yes.
I found that out.
Well, but I had no idea about changing attorneys. I had no idea that this was in the works at all.
You
None.
know, what happens is that Mr. Davis has always been asking me to do this, okay?
I have never heard a comment from
Yes,
him about
and
that.
that's, it, you can ask Dr. Vota, I think he's been asking for a very long time, if I'm not mistaken.
And if you told Mr. Castro and Mr. Castro told Mr. Frank, is that not a rolling poll?
I don't think so.
It amounts to 2. And 2 is not a quorum, so there's no
But it could be a
problem.
rolling poll.
Madam President, if I may.
It's still 2.
I think the proposed motion you have will give an opportunity to have your counsel
Right.
Deal with those
To
questions,
address
perhaps.
these concerns. So then you can go ahead and meet with Ms. Gallegos and have her answer these questions. Okay. So then let's move ahead. I will entertain a motion to approve board counsel to prepare a response to the Secretary of Education's directives to the Board of Education.
I so move.
Second.
Okay, so I have a first and a second. Any further need for discussion?
I feel a little further need.
Yes, go ahead.
It seems to me that the Secretary of Education, got her facts wrong or completely misunderstood situations that developed here in Las Cruces. For example, with LEAP and with the IT grievance. And if she had just made a simple phone call to our board president, she could have, I think, learned more about these situations. And I think what she did was totally inappropriate, and I think we have to respond to it as directed in the motion.
Okay. So then, any other comments, or?
Madam President.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So I guess as Student Advisory Council President, I want to have my own opinion. I mean,
Yes.
I read the opinion of the council. I mean, I personally think that, again, it's ridiculous that the board is having to go through these types of things. And, it's, I guess what it comes down to is kind of a he said, she said type of situation. So that's all I have to say, but, I would like to formally invite Secretary Scandera to a meeting with students, to a meeting with parents, to discuss the things that are actually happening in the district, instead of discussing meeting minutes, instead of discussing these types of things. Let's discuss the things that actually matter. So that's my response to that.
Thank you, Andre. I appreciate that. And, I've been the lone like kind of the person that stood by myself on this board for 5 years. And I never, ever questioned the board president, the board council. I never, ever said anything because I remember Dr. Votal saying, we speak as one. And this is what our problem is we're not speaking as one anymore. So I'm feeling not in a comfortable place right now. I'm sorry, but that's how I feel. So let's go ahead with this vote. All in favor?
Madam President, do we have a
Yes.
motion on the floor? I'm not sure we do.
We do. We have a
Do we?
first and a second.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yes, did you have something to say before we
No, I
finish?
just- what are we voting on?
All right, I will go over it again. I will entertain a motion to approve board council to prepare a response to the Secretary of Education's directives to the Board of Education. Do we have,
Call for the question.
You're at
Pardon
that
me?
point.
I call for the
Call for
question.
the question, Madam President. That's in
Okay,
order, and that you
okay.
may now move to the vote.
okay, so, go ahead. All in favor?
Aye.
I vote aye. Any nays? Any abstentions?
I would like to make sure that we see her response before it's sent,
Whose response?
the attorneys.
Well, you're going to meet with her, so I don't think that's a problem.
Madam President.
Your vote?
I will vote yes.
Okay, so we have, everyone voted aye. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, we now get on to old business, approval of resolution on the sale of the bonds.
And Madam President, I need to take a quick break for a second. May I have Mr. Dean
Okay,
take that
thank
on
you.
for you?
Thank you.
Madam President, members of the board, included in your packet tonight, excuse me, are the resolutions in which we took bids for the sale of $15 million of bonds and bids for the refunding bond of $2,575,000. Now, as I said, $15 million of bonds. Mr. Cassidy will explain further. This is going to net the district $15 million of cash in the use for construction. However, the bond was for actually $14,660,000. And I will let Mr. Cassidy explain the difference. Mr. Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Dean.
Go ahead.
Madam President and members of the board, good evening. I'm Paul Cassidy with RBC Capital Markets. We're the board and the district's independent financial advisor dealing with bonds and mill levy items. The district voters had approved a $65 million bond election in 2014, and what we were doing this month was selling $15 million worth of the bonds. We sell bonds as the district needs cash for the facility master plan needs to address needs that voters had addressed during the election process. We took competitive interest rate bids this morning at 10 a.m. The bid results are shown on the screen. I hope you can read it. It's pretty faint. We had two issues that we're selling. One is for $15 million, and one is a refinancing of bonds that the board had sold in 2007. Rates are higher than current market rates, so we're able to take advantage of that and pass on the savings to district taxpayers. One more comment. This is money not for operational purposes. This is money for capital, and you can't mix capital and operational money. That is, you couldn't use the savings from this sale to bolster your operational fund budget. So we did receive 8 bids for the new money issue. The best bid was a 2.53% interest rate. You can see the list of the bidders there. And I'm going to actually just point out the best bid was $253 from Morgan Stanley. And the top bid was, the lowest bid was Hilltop Securities at a 2.8%. So there's quite a spread between the best bid and the highest bid. Morgan Stanley being the best bid at the lowest interest rate. We're paying interest to investors is what we're doing, so we want the lowest rate. Then there was a refinancing issue. Morgan Stanley was the best bid there at a 1.22% interest rate. The old interest rate was about 3.7% thereabouts, so we're lowering the interest rate fairly substantially. I'm going to take you through this now fairly quickly. This page in your board packet is just a summary. I'm going to go on to something a little more interesting. This is the savings analysis for the 2007 bonds here. And what happens is when you compare the cash flow of the new bonds compared to the old bonds, it produces annual savings through the remaining life of the bonds. And so we're generating cash flow savings in aggregate of about $300,000. And when you present value it, it's about $279,000. 10% savings in interest cost is substantial. 3% is the recommended threshold. So we do recommend that you do accept that best bid. The interest rate and the maturity schedule on the $15 million general obligation bond issue sold has been adjusted, Mr. Dean asked me to explain this, to a size of $14,660,000. The bidder bid a premium, so we reduced the issue size so that the premium is netted out of that, and the cash available for project is actually $15 million. So this kind of cleans up and doesn't create any excess cash that needs to be held and used to pay future principal and interest payments. And then we have the maturity schedule for the new money, the refunding bonds. One of the other things I want to point out here is how do you evaluate and determine whether you're receiving market interest rates? And a schedule that we developed a number of years ago working with the district is to compare the yields that investors would receive if the board does authorize the bonds to a AAA index, AAA rating of other comparable districts and issuers across the country. And on the right-hand side of this schedule here, you'll see how we compared to a natural AAA rated credit. And I haven't talked about it yet, but we'll talk about the district's rating in just a second. We're not AAA. We're below AAA. We're in the AA category. And so we compared really quite favorably from negative 0.2% for the one-year maturity out to about 50 basis points higher than a natural AAA rated scale. We monitor this to make sure that investors understand the school district and that the rating agencies are getting it right too. On the refunding was really short because the outstanding debt we're refinancing is short, and the spreads were 15 to about 23 basis points, and that's acceptable. The other thing that's shown on these schedules is what investors work for, because we don't determine how much they work for. We let the markets determine that. And in the case of the new money issue, the investors will earn about $100,000 profit if they're able to sell the bonds at the yields that are shown on this page from 0.2% to about 2.9% for the 18-year maturity. And then on the short-term bonds, it's a 1.05% for a 2020 maturity out to 1.3% for a 7-year maturity. So that's how this works. And the bidding process pulls all this in, lets us evaluate it, and as your advisor, we can make a recommendation to you. The other item here is what have historical interest rates been when we put out districts' bonds in the past? And we've worked with the district since about 1988, and this is a schedule of all the sales that the school district has had on bonds and refinancing bond issues over time. And the 2.53% for the $15 million is really at a low point. You've heard a lot of discussion from the Federal Reserve and a lot of press about interest rates rising. Interest rates actually haven't risen. Short-term monetary policy is dictated that the short-term interest rates be increased 0.25%, but long-term rates have actually fallen. In fact, municipal debt is some of the highest rated debt and safest investments available to the public. And right now we have people bailing out of the equity markets or the stock market where we were seeing a lot of volatility. So issuers like Las Cruces Public Schools with a AA bond rating benefit. So you're selling 18-year bonds at an interest rate, fixed interest rate of 2.53%, and we're refinancing old debt from 2007 at a 1.22% interest rate. And the reason for the difference is it's a shorter maturity. So the new money is 18 years. The refinancing, we never extend the maturity on that. So the rates were very, very well received. So the other question becomes, well, what is the district's rating and how does that impact it? And your discussion about cash balances is really right on point. And investors look at your finances. They look at what you've done historically speaking. And then we hire a rating agency. The district pays Moody's Investor Service for an independent rating that can be used by the investment community as they look at your credit and decide whether they're going to bid on your debt or not. Moody's has a rating scale from AAA down to Baa3, AAA being the highest rating, which is the state of New Mexico's rating. The school district is rated Aa3, which is on the low end of the AA category. Then you go into the A category and into the Baa category. All of these rating categories are investment grade. If you have these ratings, investors will buy your bonds. The only difference will be the spread over your AAA rating. The lower your rating, the higher the spread, the more your community has to pay for the bonds that are being issued through their property tax bills. So we carefully monitor that, and we work very hard to maintain the district's bond ratings. The investor services, and so we're Aa3, by the way, high quality. There's also a Aa1 rating assigned because of a state intercept program. It's mandatory. And if the district didn't have enough cash in its debt service fund, the state of New Mexico is required to pay it, but then to go back to the district and find money to repay them within the current fiscal year. Because of that intercept program, Moody's rates overall a Aa1. The Aa1 rating impacts the interest rate, but investors look at the underlying rating. That is, what the district's rating is, how do they manage their finances, how they govern, what the economy looks like, how much debt you have outstanding. All those things go into the mix of your bond rating. And we have a couple of things here. I'm not sure, Madam President, if you want to get into a lot of this detail. It's here, and I have hard copies of it. But what I want to really get to, and we can come back to if it's important, is, oh, it's not on here. Included in the packet, but it's not coming up on our screen, is Moody's rating report. They actually publish a rating, and hopefully you have it and you can see it. And I really encourage you to read it. And read it before you adopt your budget, and what the superintendent was and Mr. Dean were talking about earlier really is right on point to what the rating agencies look at. Because in the end, they look at how you manage your budget, whether you stay within budget, and make sure your recurring expenditures are within your recurring revenues, and you're not using cash balances to build your budget every year, which is what you've had to do the last 3 years. You're pulling down your cash balances. And you can only do that so long, and at some point you have to make things work. Moody's talks about that in their rating opinion. Again, I just encourage you to read it. All that said, I really am bringing good news to you. The district's bond rating was maintained because of the presentation the superintendent and Mr. Dean made about the finance plan going forward. Your debt is moderate. You don't have debt that takes you to the point where it's causing investors not to buy your bonds and your debt loads are too high. It's not an issue. And investors, we had a good active bidding process with 7 or 8 bids for each issue. Interest rates are really near a 40-year low. And we would, I think it's time for a recommendation to the superintendent. We do recommend that the board approve the 2 bond resolutions that are before you. We've reviewed those. The district's bond counsel on this is the Cuddy Law Firm and McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton, which is a tax counsel. They're qualified to give legal opinions and recognized in the bond markets to do that. And that's who's represented the district on bonds for a long time. So with that, I'll just lay that recommendation out and then stand for questions from the board.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Cassidy. Board members, do we have any questions or comments?
Madam President, if there are no questions, kind of just walk through the process then.
Sure, go ahead.
Let me recommend approval of resolution authorizing the sale of the school bond series 2016A.
Okay, so then I will entertain a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the sale of school bonds series 2016A.
So moved.
A second.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Madam
So
President.
that passes.
Madam President, then may I recommend approval of the resolution authorizing the sale of general obligation school refunding bonds, Series 2016B.
And then I will go ahead and entertain a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the sale general obligation school refunding bonds, Series 2016B.
I so move.
Second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that passes.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank Mr. Cassidy and with the work he did with us. And again, you need to know he is an outstanding financial advisor to this district, has done well for a number of years. And I believe that his influence with our presentation of Moody's allowed us to retain the rating that we did. To be very candid with the board, we were on the border of having that reduced to that lower series, which would have had unfortunate effects on your long-term debt. So we're very appreciative of Mr. Cassidy's help. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as my husband says, public schools pay their bills.
They do,
Yes,
absolutely.
thank you. Okay, so we now move on to public input. Before we start, I would like to remind everyone that it is the board's practice not to respond or to take action on any statements made during public input. But just to reassure you, we do listen. And I only have 3 here. I'm hoping I haven't lost any. Okay, so, all right, we'll add you to the end. Okay, if Ms. Galvan can have you fill out a paper, that'd be great, just so we have your name for the record. Ms. Romero?
Good evening, everyone. Nice to be here this evening, and I just wanted to express my support for our school board. We really appreciate all of the things that you're doing to help our students.
She did. Talk into
Can't
the
hear?
mic. He can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Senora Flores.
Yes.
I didn't hear her first name.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. State
My
your
name is Debbie Romero.
Okay. I think we can hear you now.
Okay. And I would like to say hello to everyone this evening, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. And I'd like to thank the board for all of the work that they're doing for the students in Las Cruces Public Schools and for the teachers. And I really appreciate our student representative and the input that he has. I'm currently a first grade teacher, and those little ones don't have a voice, so I feel obligated to speak for them. And I know that our budget is tight, and I also looked up our state statute to make sure that I quoted it correctly. State statute declares that in elementary education, in first, second, and third grade, you can have an average of a number of students, but if you have 21 in first grade, you should have a full-time EA. And I know quite a few teachers are working with more than 21 or 21 without an EA. And I'm thinking about all of y'all here. Just think about being in charge of 23 first graders with all of the needs that they have and having to develop a signal for I'll be with you in just a moment after these other 3. And, you know, little ones deserve more attention than that. So I would just like to encourage, if there's any way in our budget, to try and lower the student-teacher ratio. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Romero. Mr. Neeson, Dr. Neeson?
Earl Nissen, and I do live in Las Cruces. As we reviewed all of the Scandera stuff in the paper, it almost sounded like a conspiratorial novel, and we're trying to sort out who the conspirators are. And it seems to me that we should take the position that the Secretary of Education is an employee of ours. Our tax monies pay this salary, and certainly the job description calls for a depth of understanding of what's happening in the 89 school districts in the state. And we've all commented, and we've all explored. We have someone who wouldn't even know how to open the door of a classroom and see what's going on in it because she's never had that kind of experience. So we're paying for this. Don't forget, she's a buddy of Jeb Bush and the Foundation for Excellence in Education that coming out of Florida. If you've ever read all of their publications, you know where all of this stuff is coming from about the park testing. And by the way, she's now the chairman, the national chairman of the park testing. And I can't see that as anything but a conflict of interest. So I think that we should demand a town hall meeting with Ms. Scandera, and that this board should invite her to such a town hall because of all of the controversy and so on. She ought to be here as part of her duties to us as taxpayers to come into this town and hold such a meeting. And I think at that time, we could help clarify our positions with her as opposed to just depending on the media and all this innuendo that's going on. So I would request that LCPS Board of Ed invite her to a town meeting here very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Neeson. And Mr. Hartman?
I'm Bruce Hartman, and I'm the Vice President of NEA Las Cruces. I'm here in support of our board. I think we have an extremely good board, a great board. I refer to them as the new board because I think they have, asked a lot of the hard questions that nobody asked before. Like Maria said, she was always the one, that probably had something to say, but you didn't sometimes. But, I feel that this board really listens to the staff and the students. And I do know that, a lot of staff and students and parents do contact our board members. And I can speak in support of Maria. I do know that when a teacher does contact her, she looks into it and investigates it. And that's the way it should be, okay? If a teacher calls and says, I have 27 kids in first grade, Maria does something about it. And these are our elected officials, and they are responsible to the stakeholders of the community. I know that our board policy, I don't know the exact words anymore, but it's, in essence, it says that the board is responsible for the success of the district and the success of every school. And to me, that covers a lot of things. They've made a lot of hard decisions since our two new members and Maria is president, and there have been some changes. Change is hard. Some people don't like change. And, I was very dismayed to read what was in the newspaper. I do think it was politically motivated. It was odd that the press got it first, and it was sent to Bill Allen, who was, I don't know what he was, executive director of the chamber. And, it was very odd the way the events played out. I remember about 40 years ago, I was teaching in an elementary school, and we had a physical education teacher. I remember her name. Her name was Jan Jenkins. Because lots of times, little children have trouble, whether they win or lose. And I've never forgotten, she had this slogan, in large letters in her gym. It said, "It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game." And I think we have some people that are having trouble with losing, and they haven't learned to play the game yet.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. Mr. Landers?
Hi, my name is Glenn Landers, and I'm here primarily to speak in favor of the board, but I also want to make some observations. I think Andre said something very interesting tonight when he talked about how these charges have detracted from the real issues involved with the board. I kind of think that these charges are meant to detract, not just to detract, but to stop any kind of resolution of the real problems that are facing the school district. I've noticed that the board has been trying very hard to deal with problems like overtesting, low employee morale, issues with fiscal responsibility. And it seems like, Hannah Scandero is like some kind of commando, parachutes in and stops that dead with some kind of charge about the board, violating policy. And the interesting thing to me is that sometimes the basis of that seems to be misinformation provided to her by the superintendent. And I think, I don't attend every meeting, but I've attended a lot of meetings, and there always seems to be an elephant in the room. There is a conflict between the board and the superintendent. And I think, my observation is that he is trying to trip you up, that he's trying to get you in trouble, and you need to deal with it. You need to see the kind of duplicity that he is practicing toward the board. And I want to call on the superintendent to resign. And of course, he's not going to do that. So I want to call on the board to do everything they can to get rid of him. Thank you.
Okay, we're ready to move on. Thank you.
Sorry,
Oh,
Madam President, one more comment, please.
yes.
Joe Galvan, Communications Director. It's inappropriate, I believe, for the school board to allow personal comments to be made in an open meeting. That has never been done here or allowed. I hope the practice will not continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galvan. My purpose in letting people speak is not to attack each other. That's not my purpose, but sometimes it happens, and it's hard to control. So I like to let everyone speak. So we'll move on to board member reports. I know that Mr. Frank had a report.
When I participated in school board training, one of the things that they emphasized was the importance of the Open Meetings Act. I took that incredibly seriously. I have painstakingly worked at making sure that I always followed the Open Meetings Act. If I sent an email to a school board member, it was only to one school board member. I have not participated in any rolling quorums, and if the Secretary of Education thinks that I have violated the Open Meetings Act, then I think she's the one that needs some training in what the Open Meetings Act means, because I do understand it. And I am not inclined to want to waste my time learning what I already know. Also, with regard to the Secretary of Education, I know, looking at this school board, I know, we look incredibly youthful, but we have a tremendous amount of experience in education. We also have credentials. Our secretary has 0 credentials and 0 actual public school classroom experience. So is it a surprise that she got it all wrong in her so-called scolding of this school board? So that's pretty much what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. we have any other board member reports?
Yes, I have visited the LEAP program a couple of times to see how things are going there. I think I told you the last board meeting that they have about 55 kids now. I went in earlier this week, maybe, or last week, to see their new project that they're working on for childhood obesity, and they're doing information gathering and reporting so that they can be ready to take their reporting and their findings and help younger children in Messiah Park learn about childhood obesity. So they're working hard at LEAP.
Very good. Any reports on this side?
All I gotta say is this meeting was very, very interesting to me about what we're doing and going on with. And it's food for thought for me to go back and reflect on what we said, what we did.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davis, Mr. Castro?
Yes, Madam President. I just want to make a couple of words in support of our president. I think he showed a lot of courage and a lot of commitment to doing the right thing. And so we'll continue to support you. And thank you for the good work.
Thank you. I just have a quick comment here in regards to, I have a brochure on young women in computing at NMSU. I promised the girls that gave these to me that I would pass them on to the board members, so I am doing it belatedly. And I'll just pass two on this way, and there's just a little coffee on one of them because they sat in my kitchen for a while. So here's one more. Thank you. I don't have any other anything else to say. So now to our student advisor.
Madam President, so I have another statement from the Student Advisory Council, but first I just want to make a little bit of a personal statement. You know, ever since I first set foot in this boardroom, it was last March, and it was about, you know, all the testing and all that. You know, the number one thing that I realize is that this board is here to assist students. They are here to make sure that students are able to succeed in the classroom and beyond. And so, again, I want to thank you guys for your continued commitment to students, and especially you, Madam President, for, you know, for continuing to fight for students. It's not easy. And so just thank you. Now, I also have a statement, again, by the Student Advisory Council. This is regarding an incident that took place at Centennial High School on, on January 22nd. On January 22nd, a threat was made on Centennial High School and its student body. Due to what we presume is an ongoing investigation, we will not go into additional detail about this threat. Although LCPS and LCPD worked quickly and efficiently to resolve this situation, the LCPS Student Advisory Council is concerned with certain decisions made that could have potentially put students in danger. We disagree with the decision to still hold classes while an active threat existed on Centennial High School's campus. This decision, coupled with the lack of communication from officials, left some students feeling stranded and helpless in a serious situation while their parents were scrambling to figure out what was going on. Students and parents should not have to resort to social media and word of mouth to find out what is going on in these types of situations. And we as a council hope that if a situation like this were to ever happen again, that district administration is completely transparent to the public, as well as more cautious when making these types of decisions. Every threat made on a student body must be taken as a serious one.
And I think that gives us some food for thought for future discussions, Mr. Rounds, perhaps.
Madam President, I'll withhold comment on that because there's an ongoing investigation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Andre, for that report. I think it was important. So then I will now entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, we have a first, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you and good night.